Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, I'm just going to type this out because I need to get it off my chest. I've never told this to anyone, not even my family, because who would believe me? But I found this place online where people share weird stuff, and I figure maybe someone here will get it. This happened back in January of 1979. I was 22 at the time, just out of college and kind of drifting. So I went to visit some friends who'd moved to a farm in Cambria. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, you know, a few days of fresh air and helping out with chores. But what happened that day? I still get chills thinking about it. I woke up early that morning around 6 because the cold seeped right through the walls of the old farmhouse. My friends were still asleep and the place was dead quiet except for the wind whistling through the cracks in the windows. I remember pulling on my jeans and a thick flannel shirt, the kind that smelled like wood smoke and damp earth, and heading downstairs to start a fire in the wood stove. The kitchen was freezing, my breath puffing out in little clouds, and I fumbled with the matches until the kindling caught. That was the first normal thing I did that day, and it feels like a lifetime ago. After I got the fire going, I decided to take a walk outside before breakfast. The sun wasn't fully up yet, just a grayish light creeping over the hills. The farm was nestled in this valley, surrounded by dense woods, and everything was covered in a thin layer of frost. I remember the crunch of my boots on the frozen grass, the way the cold air bit at my cheeks. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes you feel alone in a good way. I walked past the barn, where the chickens were still roosting, and headed toward the edge of the property where the forest started. That's when I noticed something odd. There were these deep impressions in the mud near the tree line, like someone had been walking there, but they were huge, way bigger than any human foot. I mean, I wear a size 10 boot, and these were easily twice that size. At first, I thought maybe it was from a bear or something, but the shape was all wrong. They were almost human-like, with a broad heel and long toes. I knelt down to get a closer look, and my heart started beating a little faster. The ground was soft from a recent rain, so the prints were clear, and they led off into the woods. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. But when I looked around, there was nothing there, just the trees swaying in the wind. I shook it off and went back to the house. My friends were up by then, and we had breakfast. Eggs from their chickens, toast, coffee. I mentioned the footprints casually, like, hey, saw some weird tracks out by the woods, and my friend just shrugged and said it was probably a deer or a stray dog. But I couldn't let it go. There was something about those prints that stuck with me. After we ate, I decided to go back out and take another look. My friends were busy with chores, so I went alone. The sun was higher now, but it was still cold, and the sky was overcast, casting everything in this dull, grey light. I followed the prints into the woods, and the further I went, the more uneasy I felt. The forest was thick with pines and oaks, and the ground was spongy with fallen needles. The prints were spaced far apart, like whatever made them was taking long strides, and they led me deeper than I'd planned to go. At one point I stopped and listened. The woods were too quiet. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling, just this heavy silence that made my ears ring. I kept going, my curiosity overriding my nerves. After about 20 minutes, I came to a small clearing where the prints seemed to circle around a patch of disturbed ground. There were broken branches, and what looked like fur caught on a thorn bush. I picked up a strand. It was coarse, dark brown, almost black, and it smelled musky like wet dog, but stronger. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural sound from somewhere close by. It wasn't a growl, more like a deep hum that vibrated through my chest. I froze, my blood running cold. I've heard bears before, and this wasn't a bear. It was something else. I started backing away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound came again, closer this time, and I could feel it in my bones. I turned and hurried back the way I came, trying not to run because I didn't want to attract attention, but my legs were shaking. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there, just shadows and trees. When I got back to the edge of the woods, I was breathing hard, sweat cooling on my skin despite the cold. I didn't tell my friends what I'd heard. I didn't want to sound crazy. The rest of the morning passed normally. We fixed a fence that had been damaged in a storm, and I tried to focus on the work. But my mind kept drifting back to those prints and that sound. Around noon, we broke for lunch, and that's when things got weirder. We were sitting on the porch, eating sandwiches, when we heard a loud crash from the barn. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. My friends and I exchanged looks and went to check it out. Inside the barn, it was dim and dusty, and one of the storage shelves had collapsed, scattering tools everywhere. At first, we thought it was just old wood giving way, but then I noticed the door to the feed room was ajar. We always kept it closed to keep out rodents. When I pushed it open, the smell hit me, that same musky odor from the woods, and there, in the corner, was a pile of feed sacks that had been torn open, grain spilled all over the floor. But what really got me were the handprints on the wall. They were huge, like the footprints, with long fingers pressed into the wood grain. My friend saw them too, and his face went pale. "What the hell could do that?" he whispered. We spent the next couple of hours securing the barn, nailing boards over weak spots, but the whole time I felt this dread building in my stomach. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. Later that afternoon, my friends had to run into town for supplies, and I volunteered to stay behind. Maybe that was stupid, but I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't just spooking easily. Once they were gone, the farm felt eerily quiet. I busied myself with cleaning up the workshop, but every little noise made me jump, the creak of the house settling, the wind picking up. Around 4 o'clock, the sky started to darken and a light rain began to fall. I decided to take one last look around before my friends got back. I grabbed a flashlight and a jacket and headed outside. The rain made everything slick and muddy, and the world seemed to shrink under the grey sky. I walked toward the woods again, not too deep, just to see if there were any new signs, and there were. Fresh footprints, even larger than the ones from the morning, leading from the tree line toward the house. My stomach dropped. I followed them with my flashlight beam, and they went right up to the back porch. There was mud on the steps, and one of the porch rails was cracked, like something big had leaned on it. I stood there for a minute, my hands trembling, and then I heard it again. That low hum. But this time it was mixed with a series of short, sharp knocks, like someone hitting a tree with a stick. It came from the woods, maybe 50 yards away. I shone my light in that direction, but the beam didn't reach far in the rain and gloom. The knocks kept coming, rhythmic and deliberate, and then they stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something moving through the underbrush. It was slow, heavy footsteps, crunching on twigs and leaves. I backed toward the house, my heart in my throat. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it getting closer. The air grew colder, and that musky smell filled my nostrils. I fumbled with the back door, my fingers slipping on the wet handle, and finally got it open. I slammed it shut behind me and locked it, leaning against it while I caught my breath. The house was dark and silent, and I felt a little safer inside. But then I heard a scratch at the door. It was a slow, dragging sound, like claws on wood. I peered through the window beside the door, but I couldn't see anything. The scratching stopped, and for a moment, everything was quiet. Then, something heavy hit the door, not a bang, but a solid thud that made the whole frame shake. I stumbled back, my legs giving way, and I ended up on the floor staring at the door. It happened again, and I saw the wood splinter near the lock. Whatever was out there was trying to get in. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the block. It felt stupid and useless, but it was all I had. I stood there in the middle of the room, listening. The thudding stopped, and I heard footsteps on the porch, circling the house. They were slow and heavy, and I could hear the boards groaning under the weight. Then a shadow passed by the window, tall and broad, blocking out what little light was left. I didn't get a clear look, just a glimpse of dark, shaggy hair and a massive shape. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt like I was going to vomit. I stayed frozen, clutching the knife, until the footsteps faded away. After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes, I heard my friend's truck pulling up the driveway. The relief was so intense I almost cried. When they came inside, I must have looked like a wreck because they asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and said I'd heard some animals outside. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. We had dinner, and I tried to act normal, but every noise made me flinch. Later that night, when I was alone in my room, I lay awake listening. I didn't hear anything else, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching. The next morning, we found more footprints around the house, and the cracked porch rail was completely broken. My friends decided to call a wildlife expert, but I knew it wasn't any animal I'd ever heard of. I left later that day, and I've never been back. That was over 40 years ago, and I still have nightmares about it. I've read stories about Bigfoot and other cryptids, but I never believed in any of that stuff until that day. Whatever it was, it felt ancient and intelligent, and it knew I was there. I can't explain it, and I don't think I ever will. Story 2. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, and I guess I need to get it out there. I've never posted anything like this online before, but I can't shake what happened. It's been eating at me, and maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just make it feel more real. Either way, here goes. I work as a delivery driver for Doritos. Yeah, I know, it sounds kind of silly when you say it out loud, but it's a steady job. I've been doing it for about 3 years now, and most days are pretty routine. I drive this big truck loaded with chips and snacks to gas stations and convenience stores along my route. It's early hours, but I don't mind. The roads are quiet, and I get to see the sun come up sometimes. But this one day, about 2 months ago, was different. It was a Tuesday, I think, because my route that week had me hitting some of the more remote spots on Tuesdays. I remember it was early, like 5 in the morning, because I'd left the depot around 4:30 to make my first stop by 6. The route I was on that day takes me through this area that's mostly forest and winding back roads. It's not completely deserted. There are a few houses scattered here and there, but it feels isolated, especially in the fog. And that morning, the fog was thick. I mean really thick, like you could barely see 50 feet ahead of you. It was that wet, clinging kind of fog that makes everything feel muffled and eerie. The air was cool and damp, and I had the heater on in the cab just to keep the windows from fogging up too much. I was driving slow, maybe 25 miles an hour, because the roads are narrow and twisty. And with the fog, I didn't want to risk missing a turn or hitting something. I was on this particular stretch of road. It's called Old Mill Road on the map, but locals just call it the back way to the gas station I was headed to. It's lined with tall pine trees on both sides, and in the fog, they looked like dark, shadowy giants looming over me. The only sounds were the hum of the truck's engine and the occasional crunch of gravel under the tires. I had the radio on low, some classic rock station, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was on the delivery ahead and just getting through the fog safely. Then I saw it. Up ahead, on the right side of the road, there was this figure. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a bear because we get those around here sometimes. But as I got closer, I realized it was upright. Tall, really tall, like way taller than a person. It had this hunched posture, like it was leaning forward, and it was covered in what looked like brown hair or fur. It was just standing there, partly obscured by the fog, but I could see enough to make my blood run cold. The hair was matted and dark, almost the color of wet bark, and it hung off its body in shaggy clumps. I couldn't see its face clearly, the fog was too thick, but it had this massive, bulky shape that didn't look human at all. My heart immediately started pounding. I mean, it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, and my hands were sweating so much I had to wipe them on my pants. I slowed down even more, almost to a crawl, because I didn't want to startle it or get too close. But then, without any warning, it moved. It stepped out onto the road right in front of my truck, and it didn't even look at me. It just crossed over, slow and deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. Its movements were kind of lumbering, but smooth, like it was used to moving through dense forest. I caught a better look as it passed through my headlights. The hair was long and coarse, and I could see muscles shifting under it. It was maybe 7 or 8 feet tall, and its arms hung down almost to its knees. I hit the brakes and came to a full stop. The truck shuddered a little, and I just sat there, frozen. My breath was coming in short, sharp gasps, and I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead. I watched it disappear into the trees on the left side of the road. It didn't make a sound, no rustling, no cracking branches, nothing. It just melted into the fog and was gone. For a few seconds I didn't move. I kept staring at the spot where it had vanished, half expecting it to come back out, but there was nothing, just the fog and the silence. My mind was racing. What the hell was that? A bear? No, bears don't walk upright like that for long. And this thing was too tall, a person in a costume. But who would be out here at 5 in the morning, in the middle of nowhere, dressed like that? And why didn't it react to me? It was like I wasn't even there. That's what creeped me out the most, the complete lack of reaction. It didn't turn its head, didn't speed up or slow down. It just ignored me. I sat there for what felt like minutes, but it was probably only 30 seconds or so. My heart was still hammering, and my hands were trembling. I thought about getting out of the truck to look, but something stopped me, a deep, primal fear. I've never been one to believe in ghosts or monsters or anything like that, but in that moment, I felt like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to, something that shouldn't exist, so I didn't get out. I just put the truck back in drive and eased forward, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching for any movement, but there was nothing. The road behind me was empty, swallowed by the fog. The rest of the drive to the gas station was tense. I kept scanning the sides of the road, expecting to see it again. Every shadow in the trees made me jump. The fog seemed even thicker now, like it was pressing in on me. I turned off the radio because the music felt wrong, too cheerful for what had just happened. My mind kept replaying the image of that thing crossing the road, the way it moved, the sheer size of it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a moose, but moose aren't that hairy, and they're not usually out this early in such open areas. Or a Bigfoot. I've heard stories, but I always thought they were just legends. Now I wasn't so sure. I finally reached the gas station around 5:45. It's this small, run-down place called Hank's Stop and Go, with 2 pumps out front and a convenience store that's barely bigger than my truck. The lights were on, and I could see old Hank inside, probably brewing coffee. Pulling into the parking lot felt like coming back to reality, but I was still shaking. I parked the truck and just sat for a minute, taking deep breaths to calm down. My shirt was damp with sweat, and my legs felt weak. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a trick of the fog, but I knew what I saw. I got out and started unloading the delivery. The air was still foggy, but it was starting to thin out a bit as the sun began to rise. The routine of unloading the boxes, stacking them on the dolly, wheeling them into the store, helped ground me. Hank greeted me with a nod. He's a quiet guy, doesn't say much, which was fine by me. I didn't want to talk about what I'd seen. I just focused on the work, checking the inventory, stocking the shelves with Doritos and other snacks, making sure everything was neat. The store was warm and smelled like coffee and stale cigarettes, a familiar comfort. As I worked, I interacted with a few early customers, a trucker grabbing a coffee, a local guy buying cigarettes. I forced myself to smile and make small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time the door opened, I'd glance over, half expecting to see that figure standing outside. But it was just normal people going about their day. The fog outside was clearing now, turning from a thick blanket to a light mist. Sunlight started filtering through, casting long shadows. It should have made me feel better, but it didn't. The memory of what I'd seen was too vivid. After I finished stocking and handed over the paperwork to Hank, I went back to my truck. It was around 7 in the morning by then. The sky was turning blue, and the fog was almost gone. I got in and just sat there for a bit, staring at the road ahead. I thought about going back to the spot where I'd seen it, but I had other deliveries to make, and honestly, I was too scared. What if it was still there? What if it wasn't alone? So I decided to just move on. The rest of the day was normal. I made my other stops, delivered chips, chatted with store managers, all the usual stuff. But the whole time, that image was in the back of my mind. Every time I drove through a wooded area, I'd feel a chill. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it, the way it didn't react to me. That's what stuck with me. It was like I was invisible, or it didn't care. And the silence. No sound at all when it moved. Later that afternoon, after I'd finished my route and was heading back to the depot, I passed by Old Mill Road again. The sun was out, and everything looked ordinary, just a quiet country road with trees and a few houses. I slowed down near the spot where I'd seen it, but there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything had been there. It was like it never happened. But I know it did. I've driven that road a few times since then, and I've never seen anything like it again. But I'm always on edge when I'm on that road, especially in the fog. I keep my eyes peeled, my hands tight on the wheel. That one sighting changed how I see things. I used to enjoy the quiet of the early mornings, but now it feels heavy, like there's something watching from the trees. I don't talk about it with anyone because who would believe me? They'd say I was tired or seeing things. But I know what I saw. It was real, and it stuck with me, this silent, haunting memory that I can't explain. Story 3. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone before, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm a retired tracker, spent most of my life in the woods, and I've seen some weird stuff, but nothing like what happened on October 20th, 2019. That was the day I went into the Bitterroot Mountains in Idaho, thinking I could finally prove something I saw as a kid. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I'd caught a glimpse of one when I was about 10 years old, just a shadowy figure moving through the trees near my grandpa's cabin. It stuck with me all these years, and after I retired, I figured I had the time and skills to go looking for proof. I know how it sounds, but I'm not some crazy conspiracy theorist. I'm just a guy who spent decades reading tracks and signs in the wild, and I always had this itch to know if what I saw was real. That morning, I woke up early, maybe around 5 in the morning. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your nose and makes you pull your jacket tighter. I'd packed my gear the night before, a backpack with water, snacks, a first aid kit, my camera, and a plaster casting kit I'd bought specifically for this trip. I drove out to the trailhead in my old pickup truck, the engine rattling a bit in the quiet of the pre-dawn. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a weak orange glow over the mountains, and I remember feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. This wasn't my first time in these woods, but it was the first time I was going in with a purpose like this. I started hiking along an old logging trail I'd scouted on a map. It was overgrown in places, with ferns and fallen branches making the going slow. The ground was soft from recent rains, and the smell of damp earth and pine filled the air. I've always loved that smell. It's comforting in a way, but that day it felt different, like the forest was holding its breath. I kept my eyes peeled for anything unusual. Broken branches, hair caught on bark, anything that might point to something big moving through here. I'd been walking for a couple of hours, my boots squelching in the mud, when I decided to take a break near a creek I remembered from previous trips. The creek was running high, the water rushing over rocks and making a steady, soothing noise. I sat on a fallen log, sipping some water and just listening to the sounds around me. Birds were chirping, squirrels were chattering. It felt normal, alive. But then, as I was about to get up, my eyes caught something on the bank of the creek. It was a footprint pressed deep into the mud. My heart skipped a beat. I've seen bear tracks, deer tracks, even moose, but this was different. It was huge, way bigger than any human foot, and it had a distinct shape. 5 toes, but they were long and almost human-like, with a wide ball and a deep impression in the heel. I'd studied casts and reports online, and this looked exactly like what people describe. I dropped to my knees, my hands shaking a little as I pulled out my camera. I took a bunch of photos from different angles, making sure to include a ruler I had for scale. The print was about 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, and it was fresh. The edges were sharp, not blurred by rain or wind. I could see where the mud had squelched up around the edges, like whatever made it was heavy. This was it, the proof I'd been hoping for. I felt a rush of adrenaline, my breath coming fast. I fumbled with my plaster kit, mixing the powder with creek water in a container I'd brought. My fingers were cold and clumsy, but I managed to pour the plaster into the print, smoothing it out carefully. I set a stick nearby to mark the spot and settled back to wait for it to dry. While I waited, the forest started to change. At first, I didn't notice it, just a gradual quieting. The birds stopped singing. The squirrels went silent. Even the creek seemed louder in the absence of other sounds. I've been in the woods enough to know that when everything goes quiet, it usually means there's a predator around, a bear, maybe, or a cougar. But this felt different. The silence was heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was thickening. I stood up, my senses on high alert. I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. Then I heard it, a loud snap, like a thick branch breaking. It came from the trees to my left, maybe 50 yards away. I froze, my eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. Nothing moved. I held my breath, listening. Another snap, closer this time, followed by a rustling sound, like something big was pushing through the bushes. My stomach tightened. I grabbed my backpack and slung it over my shoulders, my hands sweaty despite the cold. I thought about calling out, but something stopped me, a gut feeling that I shouldn't draw attention to myself. That's when I saw it. Through a gap in the trees, a figure emerged. It was tall, way taller than any man I've ever seen, easily 8 feet or more. It had dark brown fur that looked matted and shaggy, covering its body from head to toe. Its shoulders were broad, almost twice the width of a human's, and it stood upright, just like a person, but with a slight stoop, like it was built for moving through dense forest. I couldn't see its face clearly, it was turned partly away, but I caught a glimpse of a heavy brow and what looked like deep-set eyes. It moved slowly, deliberately, its steps silent on the soft ground. I felt a chill run down my spine, the kind that makes your hair stand on end. This was real. This was what I'd seen as a kid. For a second, I was frozen, just staring. Part of me wanted to take more photos to document this, but my body wouldn't move. Then it turned its head, and I felt its eyes on me. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like being pinned down, an intense, intelligent gaze that made my blood run cold. I took a step back, my boot crunching on a twig. The sound seemed to echo in the silence. The figure didn't run or charge, it just stood there watching me. Then it started moving again, not toward me, but parallel to the trail, keeping pace with me as I began to back away. That's when the terror really set in. I've been stalked by animals before, once by a mountain lion, but this was different. This thing was intelligent. It was matching my movements, staying just far enough away that I couldn't get a clear shot with my camera, but close enough that I could feel its presence. Every time I took a step, it took one too, its huge feet barely making a sound. I could hear its breathing, a low, rhythmic sound that mixed with the rustling of leaves. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. Sweat trickled down my back, despite the cool air. I kept my eyes locked on it, afraid to look away even for a second. Then the wood knocks started. At first, it was just one, a loud, hollow thud from somewhere deeper in the forest. It sounded like someone hitting a tree with a thick branch. Then another, closer, from the opposite direction. They weren't random. They felt coordinated, like signals. I'd read about this in accounts from other people, how Sasquatches use wood knocks to communicate. Hearing it in person was terrifying. Each knock sent a jolt through me, and I could feel the vibrations in the ground. The figure in front of me paused, tilting its head as if listening, then let out a low grunt that rumbled in its chest. I swear, the sound was so deep I could feel it in my bones. I knew I had to get out of there. I started moving faster, still backing away, but my legs felt like jelly. I stumbled over a root, catching myself on a tree trunk. The bark was rough under my hands and I could smell the sap. A sharp, piney scent that normally I'd find calming, but now it just added to the surrealness of the situation. The figure was still there, keeping its distance but always in sight. It never made a threatening move, but the sheer size of it and the intelligence in its eyes were enough to scare me shitless. I remembered stories I'd read online where people talked about being followed for miles, and I didn't want to find out if that was true. I decided to make a break for it. I turned and started jogging back the way I'd come, my backpack bouncing against my back. I could hear it moving behind me, its footsteps heavy but quiet, like it was gliding over the ground. Branches snapped in the distance, and more wood knocks echoed around me, coming from multiple directions now. It felt like I was surrounded. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my throat was dry. I didn't look back. I just focused on the trail ahead, praying I wouldn't trip or get lost. The hike back felt twice as long as the hike in. Every shadow in the trees seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. I kept expecting to feel a hand on my shoulder or hear something right behind me. At one point, I heard a low growl from my left, and I picked up the pace, almost running now. My muscles ached, and I was sweating buckets, the cold air making my skin clammy. I could still feel its eyes on me, that intense gaze burning into my back. It was like it was herding me, pushing me toward the edge of the forest. Finally, I burst out of the trees and onto the road where my truck was parked. The sun was higher in the sky now, but the light felt harsh and unwelcome. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. I scrambled into the driver's seat, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a minute, just breathing, my whole body trembling. I looked back at the forest, half expecting to see it step out of the trees, but there was nothing. Just the quiet, empty woods. I started the engine and drove away, not even bothering to check if the plaster cast was dry or if I'd left anything behind. I didn't look back. The whole drive home, my mind was racing. I kept replaying what I'd seen, the size of it, the way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes. I'd spent years wanting to prove Sasquatch was real, but now that I had, all I felt was fear. I realized some mysteries are better left alone. When I got home, I stored the cast and the photos in a box in my garage. I haven't touched them since, and I've never gone back to those mountains. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but I know it was real, and I know I'm never going to forget it. Story 4. Okay, I'm Lynn Smith. I've been turning this over in my head for years now, and I guess it's time to just put it out there. Caleb Morris gave me his blessing to tell this. Said maybe it'll keep someone else from being caught as off guard as we were. This happened in northern Alabama, back in October. I want to say it was a Tuesday. The leaves were just starting to turn, that kind of rusty color they get, and the morning air had that first real bite of cold that tells you summer's well and truly gone. Caleb and we'd been hunting buddies for a good long while. He was the best woodsman I ever knew. Grew up in these hills, knew every creek and deer trail like the back of his hand. He wasn't a nervous man, not by a long shot. But he had this one thing, this deep-seated fear he almost never talked about. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. Most folks around here would laugh it off as a campfire story, but not Caleb. He believed, and not in a fun, speculative way. He believed like a man who'd seen something once that he couldn't explain, and the memory of it had its hooks in him. The night before, he called me. His voice was tight, thin, like a wire about to snap. He said he'd been out back of his property, just checking the tree line before dark, when he heard it, a long, deep cry from deep in the woods. He said it wasn't a coyote, wasn't a bear, wasn't anything he'd ever heard in 50-some years of living in those woods. He said it was low and heavy, like it vibrated right through the ground and up into your bones. He was shaken, I could hear it. He wasn't just telling a story, he was confessing a fear. He begged me, and Caleb never begged, to come out with him for a morning hunt. He said he didn't want to be out there alone. I agreed, mostly because I was worried about him. I figured he'd just spooked himself, maybe heard a bobcat or something, and his imagination did the rest. I got to the meeting spot just before dawn, the sky that deep dark blue right before the sun cracks the horizon. My truck headlights washed over Caleb, and I remember just staring for a second. He looked like he was gearing up for a war. He had these 2 high-powered rifles slung over his shoulders, and he'd strapped no less than 3 massive LED lights to his chest and 1 on his head. The batteries for them were in a heavy pack on his back. He looked ridiculous, but the look on his face wiped away any thought of laughing. He was pale, his eyes were wide, and his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. "You planning on signaling the space station with all that light?" I tried to joke, but it fell flat. He just shook his head, not even a flicker of a smile. "Just take this," he said, handing me one of the rifles. It was his spare, a .3006. "And I need you to do something for me, Lynn. I need you to take a stand up on that hillside." He pointed to a steep ridge overlooking a thicket of pines and a small creek bottom. It was a decent spot, but it wasn't my usual. My usual was down in the bottom, closer to the water where the deer liked to cross. "Why up there?" I asked. "The wind's better down by the creek." "Just humor me," he said, and there was a pleading tone in his voice that made my stomach feel funny. "The visibility is better from the ridge. You can see more. I'll be down in the bottom. If anything happens, you'll have a better vantage point." I agreed. What else was I gonna do? I took the rifle and the heavy spare light he insisted I carry, and I started the climb up the ridge. The ground was soft and damp from the night's dew, and the fallen leaves made it slippery. I could hear Caleb crunching off through the woods below, his steps hurried, like he was trying to get to his spot before the sun came up, like he was racing the dark. I found a good-sized oak to lean against, right on the crest of the ridge. I settled in, the cold, damp earth seeping through my pants. The sun was just starting to lighten the sky, turning it from deep blue to a soft gray. I'm not the kind to sit and stare into the woods for hours on end, not when there's a good book to be read. So I pulled out my paperback, a worn-out thriller, and used the faint morning light to read. It was quiet. The kind of deep woods quiet that's not really quiet at all. You could hear the rustle of a squirrel, the distant call of a crow, the gentle sigh of the wind through the pine needles. It was peaceful. Normal. Then it happened. It wasn't a slow build. It was an explosion. A huge, sudden burst of sound erupted from the creek bottom right below me. It was the sound of wings, a whole flock of something, turkeys, probably, being flushed from their roost all at once. It was incredibly loud, a frantic, thundering flapping that shattered the morning calm. And right on top of that sound, I heard a crash, a heavy metallic and plastic crunch, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Then silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier and more threatening than any noise. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I dropped my book and scrambled to my knees, peering down into the gloom of the bottom. I couldn't see Caleb, but I could see his lights, or what was left of them. One of the big LEDs was lying on the ground, its beam pointing uselessly at a tree trunk, flickering. The other one was just gone. The headlamp was smashed, little pieces of plastic and glass glittering in the faint light. "Caleb?" I called out, my voice sounding too high, too thin in the vastness of the woods. No answer, just that oppressive, waiting silence. My mind was racing. Maybe he'd tripped, fell and hit his head on a rock. That would explain the crash. The birds flushing could have just been a coincidence, startled by his fall. It made sense. It was logical. I clung to that logic like a life raft. I waited a minute. 5, 10. The sun was properly up now, casting long, weak shadows through the trees. The woods were coming to life, but from Caleb's direction, there was nothing. No movement, no sound. After about an hour of this, the concern had solidified into a cold, hard knot of fear in my gut. Logic was starting to feel flimsy. I stood up, my legs stiff and cold, and I started making my way down the ridge. I had the rifle held tight, my finger resting alongside the trigger guard. I moved slowly, carefully, my eyes scanning every shadow, every cluster of bushes. The whole way down, the only thing I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I found him about 50 yards from where I'd guessed his stand would be. He was lying on his back in a bed of brown leaves, his arms splayed out. His face was turned to the side, pale and slack. His remaining chest light was off. The pack with the batteries was beside him, its strap broken. For a terrifying second, I thought he was dead. I rushed over and dropped to my knees, my hands shaking as I felt for a pulse in his neck. It was there, strong and fast. He was breathing. He was just out cold. I was patting his cheek, saying his name, trying to rouse him, when his eyes snapped open. They weren't focused. They were wide with pure, undiluted terror. He didn't see me at first. He gasped, a ragged sucking sound, and his body tensed. Then his eyes locked onto mine and his hands came up, gripping the front of my jacket with a strength that shocked me. His fingers were like iron. "Lynn," he choked out, his voice a dry rasp. It came out of the brush. Oh God, it came right out of the brush. What did, Caleb? What happened? Did you fall? He shook his head violently, his grip tightening. No, no fall. Something huge. It charged me. I heard the birds. I turned, and it was just there, bigger than a man, dark. It just blotted out the trees. He was trembling all over, a fine, constant shake that I could feel through his hands. It swatted the lights off me like they were nothing. Just one hit, then it was gone. I must have passed out. I saw it and everything just shut down. I helped him sit up. He was still clutching my jacket. I believed he believed it. The fear on his face was the most real thing I'd ever seen. It was a primal, gut-level terror that you can't fake. But a part of me, the logical, practical part, was still scrambling for an explanation. A disoriented bear, maybe, a big buck deer, startled by the birds, running blindly. It had to be something like that. It had to be. The alternative was just, it was too much. "Let's get you back to the truck," I said, my own voice steadier than I felt. I got him to his feet. He was unsteady, leaning on me heavily. We didn't talk on the walk back. He just kept looking over his shoulder, his eyes darting into every shadow. We collected his dropped rifle and the pieces of his broken lights. The walk back to our vehicles, parked on an old logging road, felt like it took forever. The woods, which had always been a place of peace for me, now felt like they were watching us. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made us both flinch. We got to the trucks. The sun was fully up now, a bright, cheerful October morning that felt completely wrong for what had just happened. The normalcy of it was almost insulting. Caleb leaned against his own truck, his head bowed, breathing deeply. He looked exhausted and deeply embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Lynn," he muttered, not looking at me. "I lost my head. I don't know what came over me." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "You took a knock, anyone would be shook up." He just nodded, still looking at the ground. I walked around to the driver's side of my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. I remember the feeling of the cold metal door handle in my hand. I remember pulling it, the click of the latch as the door began to swing open, and that's when we heard it. It came from the field on the other side of the road, a wide, overgrown pasture dotted with hay bales. It wasn't a cry, not like Caleb had described. This was a low, heavy moan. It was so deep it was almost more of a feeling than a sound, a vibration that started in the soles of my feet and traveled right up my spine. It wasn't loud, but it carried, rolling across the field and hitting us with a physical weight. It was the sound of something massive, something with lungs bigger than any animal I'd ever encountered. It was a sound of pure ancient wildness. It was a sound that didn't belong in this world. Every hair on my arms and on the back of my neck stood straight up. A cold wash of adrenaline hit me so hard I felt dizzy. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't think, I didn't analyze, I didn't look at Caleb. My body just moved. I threw myself into the truck, yanked the door shut, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed it into gear, my foot stomping on the gas before I'd even fully registered what I was doing. Gravel sprayed from the tires. In my rearview mirror, I saw Caleb doing the exact same thing, his truck lurching forward in a cloud of dust. We didn't stop. We didn't talk on the road. We just drove, faster than was safe on those winding back roads, until we were back in cell service range, back in a world that felt sane. I learned a lot of things that day. I learned to always carry extra lights and batteries when hunting in the dark. But more than that, I learned what real, unexplained terror feels like. It's not the fear of a known thing, like a snake or a bear. It's the fear of the blank space on the map, the thing that has no name. It's the sound in the field that raises the hair on your neck and makes you run without knowing why. Caleb's collapse was frightening, but that sound is what I still hear sometimes when it's quiet. That's the part I can't explain. That's the part that stuck with me, and that's how it ended. Just that sound, and then running. I still don't know what it was. I don't think I ever will. Story 5. I was driving home from work on the K7 highway in Kansas, somewhere between Overland Park and Lansing. It was around midnight, and I'd just finished a long shift. I work in a warehouse, loading and unloading trucks, so by the end of the day I'm usually dead tired. That night was no different. My back was aching, my eyes were heavy, and all I wanted was to get home, crash on the couch, and maybe watch some TV until I passed out. The highway was pretty empty at that hour, which is normal. It's mostly just me and the occasional trucker heading in the opposite direction. The road stretches out through these flat, open areas with fields on either side. And sometimes you can see the lights from farms way off in the distance. But that night, it was pitch black, except for my headlights cutting through the darkness. I had the radio on low, just some classic rock station playing in the background, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was wandering, thinking about bills, what I needed to do over the weekend, just the usual stuff. The air was cool because it was late fall, and I had the window cracked open a bit to keep myself awake. I could smell that damp, earthy scent from the fields, mixed with the exhaust from my car. I was driving a beat-up old sedan, nothing fancy, but it gets me where I need to go. The seat was worn out, and I could feel every bump in the road through the steering wheel. I was probably going about 60 miles an hour, not speeding, but not crawling either. The highway has 2 lanes in each direction, and I was in the right lane, just cruising along. Everything was calm, almost boring. I remember glancing at the clock on the dashboard. It was just past midnight, and thinking how much I hated these late shifts. My eyes were starting to feel gritty, and I was fighting off that heavy feeling you get when you're too tired to focus properly. Then, out of nowhere, something moved on the road ahead of me. At first, I thought it was a deer. We get a lot of them around here, especially at night, and they'll dart across the highway without warning. I've had a few close calls before, so my instinct was to slow down and be ready to swerve. But this was different. This thing was huge, way bigger than any deer I'd ever seen, and it was moving on 2 feet. I swear, my heart just dropped into my stomach. It happened so fast that I didn't even have time to process it. 1 second the road was empty, and the next, this massive shape burst out from the right side, right into my lane. It was running, but not like an animal on all 4s. It was upright like a person, but way too big and moving way too fast. I mean, I've seen deer run and they're quick, but this was something else. It was like a blur. But in that split second, I could see details that are burned into my brain. The fur was what caught my eye first. It wasn't the brown or grey you'd expect from a deer or a coyote. It was this dirty blonde color, kind of wavy, and it looked like it was about 2 or 3 inches long. It covered its whole body, and in the glow of my headlights, it had a weird, almost shaggy texture. The size of it was unbelievable. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was as big as a horse. I've seen horses up close, and this thing was easily that tall and broad. Its tailbone, or what I guess was its tailbone, was level with my car window. I drive a sedan, so the window is maybe 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and this thing's back end was right there, towering over me. I didn't have time to slow down or even think. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I jerked it to the left, swerving into the other lane. Thank God there was no one coming from the opposite direction. The tires squealed, and I felt the car lurch, but I managed to avoid hitting it. I didn't even brake. I just kept going, my foot frozen on the gas pedal. As I swerved, I got a glimpse of its back end as it crossed the road and disappeared into the darkness on the left side. It was moving so fast that it was just a shadow, vanishing into the trees and fields beyond. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I was sweating, even though the air coming through the window was cool. My hands were shaking, and I had to grip the wheel tighter to steady them. I kept driving, but I was staring into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it chasing after me or something. But there was nothing, just the empty road behind me, fading into the dark. The whole thing probably lasted less than 5 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. In that moment, all I could think was, what the hell was that? It wasn't a bear. Bears don't run on 2 feet like that, and they're not that tall or fast. It wasn't a person in a costume or something, because no one could move that quickly. And the size was all wrong. The only thing that came to mind was Bigfoot. I've heard stories, seen those TV shows, but I never really believed in that stuff. I always thought it was just folklore or hoaxes, but seeing it with my own eyes, it changed everything. I drove for another 10 minutes or so, still shaking, before I even thought about slowing down. My mind was racing. I kept replaying the image in my head, the way it moved, the fur, the size. It was so real, so physical. I could almost smell it, a musky animal smell that had filled the car for a second when the window was open. It wasn't like anything I'd smelled before, not like a dog or a skunk, but something wilder, earthier. I thought about pulling over to catch my breath, but I was too scared. What if it was still out there? What if it followed me? The highway was surrounded by fields and patches of woods, and it felt like anything could be hiding in there. I kept checking the mirrors, my eyes darting back and forth, expecting to see those glowing eyes or something. but there was nothing. Just the darkness and the hum of the engine. By the time I got closer to home, the initial shock had worn off a little, but the fear was still there, sitting in my gut like a rock. I was relieved that my car wasn't totaled. If I'd hit that thing, it would have done some serious damage, maybe even killed me. But more than that, I was haunted by what I'd seen. That image of it running across the road, so fast and powerful on two legs. It didn't make sense. Animals don't move like that. Not around here, anyway. I pulled into my driveway and just sat in the car for a few minutes, too keyed up to go inside. My hands were still trembling, and I had to take a couple of deep breaths to calm down. I kept thinking about the fur, how it was that dirty blonde color, almost like straw, and how it waved as it moved, and the size. God, the size of it. I've seen moose up north, and they're big, but this was different. It was built more like a person, but scaled up, with broad shoulders and a thick body. I went inside eventually, but I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it again, darting across the road. I got up and looked out the window a few times, half expecting to see it standing in my yard, but of course, there was nothing. The next day, I thought about reporting it to someone, but who would I tell? The police? They'd probably laugh at me, a wildlife agency. I doubt they'd take it seriously. So I just kept it to myself, but it's been eating at me ever since. I've driven that stretch of highway a few times since then, always during the day, and I've never seen anything like it again. But every time I'm on that road at night, I get this uneasy feeling, like I'm being watched. I slow down now, especially around that spot, and I keep my eyes peeled. Part of me wants to see it again to prove I wasn't imagining things, but another part is terrified of what might happen if I do. The thing is, I know what I saw. It wasn't a hallucination from being tired. I've driven tired before, and I've never seen anything like that. It wasn't a trick of the light or some animal I misidentified. It was real, and it was something I can't explain. To this day, I have no idea what it was, but I'm convinced it was no ordinary animal, and that thought alone is enough to keep me up at night. Story 6. That day started like any other in late September. The air had that first real bite of autumn, the kind that makes the inside of your nose feel cold. I'd been up since 4 in the morning doing the rounds. We'd lost a heifer the night before, one of the older girls, just laid down and didn't get back up. No sign of sickness or injury, just her time. It's a part of the life, but it's always a hard one. She was a good cow. I couldn't leave her out in the north pasture. The smell would draw every scavenger from here to the national forest, and I didn't want the rest of the herd getting spooked. So after I'd finished the morning chores and had a quick, greasy breakfast of eggs and bacon, I hooked the old flatbed trailer to my John Deere tractor. It wasn't a fancy new one, just a reliable workhorse. Green paint faded to a dull moss color. I used the front loader to get the heifer onto the trailer. She was heavy, a dead weight that made the tractor's hydraulics groan. The smell was already starting, that sweet, thick, coppery odor of death. I threw a tarp over her, more to spare my own nose than anything else. My plan was to take her up the old logging road that cuts up the mountain behind our property. It's a rough track, overgrown in places, but the tractor could handle it. There's a spot about 2 miles up, a clearing on a steep slope where the soil is soft and rocky, perfect for a burial. It's quiet up there, just the wind in the tall Douglas firs and the occasional scolding of a Steller's jay. The ride up was slow. The tractor doesn't have a cabin, just a metal seat, and every bump and jolt travels right up your spine. The engine was a steady, chugging roar that drowned out most other sounds. I remember the sun was out, but it was that weak autumn sun that doesn't give much heat. The light came down through the trees in long, slanting shafts, catching the dust motes and bits of chaff I was kicking up. I got to the clearing and started the grim work. I'd dug a few of these graves before. You use the tractor's backhoe to scoop out a big hole, then you maneuver the carcass in and push the dirt back. It's a physical, grimy job, and you're usually so focused on not breaking a hydraulic line or tipping the tractor that you don't think about much else. But that day, about halfway through digging the hole, I got this feeling. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a sound. The tractor was still making too much noise for that. It was a prickle on the back of my neck, a tightness between my shoulder blades, the simple animal feeling of being watched. I shut the tractor off to take a swig of water from my canteen, and in the sudden silence, the feeling got 10 times worse. The forest had gone quiet. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. I scanned the tree line, the thick wall of green and shadow that surrounded the clearing. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. Something was in there, and it had its eyes on me. I told myself I was being stupid. It was just the creepiness of the place, the unpleasant job. I started the tractor back up, the roar a welcome shield against the silence. I went back to work, digging the hole deeper, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My shoulders were hunched up around my ears. I kept glancing over my shoulder, my eyes straining to pick out a shape, a movement, anything in the dappled shadows of the woods. That's when the first rock came. It wasn't thrown from right nearby. It came in from the trees to my left, from up the slope. It was about the size of a golf ball, a rough, grey piece of granite. It didn't whistle or anything movie-like that. It just cracked against a larger stone on the ground about 3 feet from my boots, then bounced and landed near my foot. The sound was sharp and totally out of place. My heart just about leaped into my throat. I jerked my head up, staring into the woods. Nothing. No movement. My mind raced through the possibilities. A kid. A hiker. But we were miles from any trailhead, and who would be throwing rocks? It didn't make sense. Maybe it was a coincidence, dislodged by an animal, but the slope wasn't that steep, and there was no rumble or other falling debris, just that one perfectly aimed rock. My hands were sweaty on the tractor's controls. The feeling of being watched was now a cold certainty. I was not alone. I decided to hurry the hell up. I finished the hole, a ragged gash in the earth, then used the loader to push the heifer's covered body into it. It landed with a soft, final thud. I started pushing the pile of excavated dirt back in, working faster than was safe. The tractor bucked a little as I rushed the hydraulics. All I wanted was to be out of that clearing and back down the mountain. I was almost done, just smoothing over the last of the mound, when the second rock hit. This one didn't land near me. It hit me. It struck me square on the top of my left shoulder, hard. It felt like someone had punched me with a knuckle of stone. A hot, sharp pain exploded through my muscle and radiated down my arm. I yelled, a short, shocked sound, and my head snapped to the left, towards where it had come from. And I saw it, maybe 60, 70 yards away, just at the edge of the tree line, partly obscured by the trunk of a massive fir tree. It was standing upright. It was tall. So damn tall, 7.5, maybe 8 feet, and broad with huge shoulders that sloped down to powerful-looking arms. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't black like in the stories. It was a reddish-brown color, like rusty iron or wet cedar bark. It wasn't just lanky, it was thick, solid, built like a powerlifter. It was just standing there, watching me, and the feeling that came off it wasn't curiosity. It wasn't peaceful. It was a pure, simple hostility, a territorial anger. It felt like a challenge, a warning. This was its place, and I was a trespasser. Our eyes met. I couldn't see them clearly from that distance, just dark pits in a face that was pushed forward, not quite human, not quite bare. It was the most terrifying moment of my life up to that point. Every hair on my body stood up. My blood went cold. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a man in a suit. This was something else. Something old and wild and pissed off. I didn't think. I didn't shout or reach for a weapon. There was only one thought in my head. Run. I slammed the tractor into gear and gunned it. The old machine lurched forward, its big tires churning up the soft earth of the grave mound. I didn't care. I was headed for the logging road, the path down the mountain. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was too scared of what I might see coming after me. The logging road is narrow and winding, cut into the side of the mountain. It's all tight switchbacks. I took the first curve way too fast, the trailer fishtailing behind me, threatening to jackknife and send me and the tractor tumbling down the mountainside. I forced myself to slow down a little, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The engine screamed in protest. I was leaning forward on the seat, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes glued to the track ahead. And then I saw it again. I came around the next sharp bend, and there it was. It was standing in the middle of the road, about 100 yards ahead, just standing there, facing me. It had gotten ahead of me. There was no way. The road twisted and turned. It was 2 miles of winding track. I had been driving fast. For it to be there, it would have had to. It had cut straight down the mountain. The sheer, impossible steepness of the slope between the switchbacks was something a mountain goat would think twice about. It was a tangle of fallen logs, thorny devil's club, and sheer muddy drops. But this thing had just gone straight down through all of it to cut me off. The intelligence of that, the raw, terrifying power, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't some dumb animal. It was hunting me. It was playing with me. It just stood there for a second. A massive reddish silhouette against the green-grey of the forest. Then it turned and melted back into the trees on the other side of the road. I kept driving, my throat so tight I could barely breathe. The fear was a cold fire in my veins. I came around the next bend, my eyes scanning the road frantically, and there it was again. Further down, but standing right in the middle of the track, waiting. It was doing it again. It would disappear into the woods as I approached, and then reappear at the next curve, always ahead of me, always cutting down the mountain to get in front of me. It was herding me, showing me it could be anywhere it wanted, any time it wanted. The rest of the ride down the mountain was a blur of pure, undiluted terror. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. Every snap of a branch was it coming for me. I expected it to leap onto the road right in front of the tractor, to reach out and pluck me from the seat. I was sweating despite the cold, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. When I finally bounced out onto the flat, maintained gravel of my own access road, I didn't stop. I drove the tractor and trailer right up to the equipment shed, killed the engine, and just sat there shaking. I could smell my own fear, a sharp, sour smell. I looked back at the mountain. It was just sitting there, silent and immense, hiding its secret. The rest of the afternoon was a write-off. I was jumpy, starting at every little sound. I tried to act normal for my wife, but she knew something was wrong. I just told her I'd wrenched my shoulder digging the grave. I couldn't tell her the truth. She'd have thought I'd lost my mind. Evening came. I did the evening feed, my eyes constantly drifting back to the tree line. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and purples. But the beauty was lost on me. The woods were turning into a wall of blackness. I finished up and was walking back towards the house when my 2 blue heelers, who had been sniffing around the barn, suddenly froze. Their ears went flat, their tails tucked between their legs. A low, terrified whine came from the older one. Then, as one, they bolted for the house, scrambling onto the porch and whining to be let in. I stood frozen in the yard, my feed bucket hanging from my hand. I knew, I just knew. I turned around slowly, my heart sinking into my boots. There, at the edge of the pasture, maybe 50 yards away, just where the tall grass met the shadow of the forest, it was standing. It was back. The last of the twilight caught its reddish fur, making it seem to glow faintly. It was even bigger than I remembered, a solid mass of muscle and wildness. It was just standing there, perfectly still, facing me. And then it turned its head, and I knew it was looking right at me. I could feel its gaze like a physical pressure. We locked eyes. It felt like forever, trapped in that silent, horrifying stare. I could see its face more clearly now in the fading light, the heavy brow, the flat nose, the sheer otherness of it. There was no curiosity in its look now, no anger. It was just an assessment, a final long look. I was so scared I felt my bladder loosen. I thought I was going to wet myself right there in the yard. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was pinned in place by that ancient knowing stare. Then it moved. It didn't run. It didn't make a sound. It just turned with a slow, powerful grace that was somehow more terrifying than a charge, and walked away. It took 2, 3 strides, and the deep shadows of the trees swallowed it whole. It was gone. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, just shaking. The night sounds slowly returned, the crickets, the distant call of an owl. But the world felt different. It felt thinner, like a veil had been torn, and I'd seen what was on the other side. I never saw it again. I never found tracks. I never heard any more rocks. But I know what I saw. I know the feeling of that hostile intelligence, the impossible speed as it cut down the mountain, the final marking stare in my own backyard. It marked me. That terror is a part of me now, a cold stone sitting in my gut that I carry with me every single day. I still work the ranch. I still go up that mountain when I have to, but I'm never alone up there. I know I'm not. And I know that some things out there in the old dark woods don't want to be found, and they don't take kindly to those who stumble upon them. I locked eyes with one of those things, and I'll never forget it. Story 7. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never posted anything like this before, but I've been reading stories on here for a while, and I guess I finally need to get this off my chest. It happened a couple of years ago, but it feels like yesterday. I still get this cold, heavy feeling in my stomach when I think about it, which is why I usually don't. But it's late, and I can't sleep, and it's just sitting there in my head. So here goes. It was a Thursday in late October. I remember because my husband Mark had a work thing in Zolo, Arizona, which is this tiny little town in the middle of nowhere. I'd driven him out there in the morning so he could leave his truck for some off-site equipment maintenance. And I was driving back home to Springerville alone in our car. The plan was for him to get a ride back with a co-worker later that night. The drive out had been fine, a little overcast, but nothing crazy. But by the time I dropped him off and started heading back, maybe around 3 in the afternoon, the weather was starting to turn. The sky had gone from a flat grey to this bruised, ugly colour, purplish black in the distance. The wind was picking up too, whipping across the high prairie and shaking the car. You know that sound, when a gust hits the side of your car and it makes a kind of whomp noise? It was doing that a lot. I was on US Highway 60, which if you've never driven it is a long, lonely stretch of road. It's not the interstate. It's mostly just 2 lanes cutting through this vast, empty landscape. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush and juniper, the occasional clump of pine trees, but mostly it's just open. You can see for miles. And that day, with the storm coming, it felt even more empty and exposed. I remember feeling a little knot of anxiety in my chest, the kind you get when you know you're about to drive through bad weather and you're all by yourself. I had the heater on because the temperature had dropped, and I was gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, leaning forward a little, my eyes constantly scanning the road ahead. I'm a cautious driver anyway, but on that road, you have to be. Deer and elk cross all the time, and hitting one is no joke. I'd already seen a small herd of mule deer about 20 minutes back, just standing near the shoulder, watching the car go by. I'd passed through the little dot on the map called Vernon maybe 10-15 minutes earlier. There's nothing there, really. A few scattered buildings. Then you're back to emptiness. The road was completely deserted. I hadn't seen another car going either direction for what felt like a long time. It was just me, the grey asphalt, the howling wind, and this huge, threatening sky. I was coming up on a gentle rise in the road. To my left was a wide, open field. brown and dead-looking that time of year, with a standard 3-strand barbed wire fence running along the shoulder. Beyond the field, the land dipped down into one of those shallow, rocky canyons that are all over out there. To my right, it was just more open prairie rising up to some low hills. That's when I saw the movement. Out of the corner of my left eye, something big broke from the tree line at the far edge of the field. My first thought, my automatic thought, was elk. It had to be an elk. It was big and dark. I took my foot off the gas, ready to brake, my eyes locked on it. But almost immediately my brain started throwing up error messages. The way it was moving was wrong. It wasn't the graceful bounding run of a deer or an elk. This was different. It was powerful, but it was a lope. A controlled, ground-eating lope, and it was coming straight for the road, straight for me. I slowed down more, my heart starting to thump a little harder. I was probably going 40 miles an hour now, just coasting, my eyes wide. The thing was covering ground so fast. It was still a couple 100 yards away, but with every one of its strides, it closed the distance in a way that felt impossible. It was just eating up the earth, and then I could see it clearly, and my brain just stopped. It was tall, so tall. I'm bad with estimating height, but I remember thinking it had to be over 7 feet, maybe way over. It was built, not lanky. Its body was a dark, matte brown, like wet bark or dark earth. It wasn't furry like a bear. It was more like a thick, shaggy hide. Its arms were long, swinging at its sides as it ran, and its legs were powerful, driving it forward. But the worst part was that I couldn't see a face. It was just a dark shape where a face should be. My mind was screaming, "Bear! It's a bear!" But bears don't run like that. They don't have that kind of lanky, two-legged gait. This thing was running upright like a man, but no man is built like that, and no man moves like that. It was headed for the barbed wire fence that separated the field from the road. I remember a stupid, detached part of my brain thinking, it's going to run right into the fence. But it didn't. It never broke its stride. As it got to the fence, it reached out its left arm, and I remember this with a clarity that haunts me. It reached out and put its hand on top of one of the steel T-posts. It didn't grab it. It just placed its palm on top, like you'd push off from a wall. And in one fluid, continuous motion, it vaulted over the 3 strands of barbed wire. It wasn't a jump. It was a vault. Its legs swung over, its body cleared the wires with what must have been a foot of space to spare, and it landed on the gravel shoulder without a single pause in its loping run. The ease of it. That's what shattered my reality. It was so effortless. It was like the fence wasn't even there, like it was just a minor inconvenience, a small step in its path. The power and coordination in that single movement were beyond anything I'd ever seen in an animal. It was unnatural. My car was almost parallel to it now. I had slowed to a crawl, maybe 15 miles an hour. I was frozen, just staring. It crossed the eastbound lane in 2 of those huge strides and hit the double yellow line. It was right there, maybe 50 feet from my driver's side window. It didn't look at me. Its head was facing forward, toward the other side of the road. But for a split second as it crossed in front of my car, I felt its presence. It's hard to explain. It was like a physical pressure in the air, a weight. I got a whiff of something too, a smell that came in through the car's vents. It was musky, pungent, like a combination of wet dog and old rotten leaves, and something else, something foul, like decay. It made my nose wrinkle and my stomach turn. Then it was across the westbound lane. It went down the slight embankment on the other side and disappeared into the mouth of the small canyon, swallowed by the junipers and shadows. Just gone. The whole thing, from when I first saw it to when it vanished, lasted maybe 10 seconds, 15 at the most. My car was still rolling forward. I had taken my foot completely off the gas. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My heart wasn't just pounding, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clutch the steering wheel to keep them still. I felt cold all over, a deep internal cold that had nothing to do with the weather. I finally managed to press the gas again, my foot jerky and uncoordinated. I drove for another 100 yards or so, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, expecting to see it come back out, to see it following me. The canyon area was just a dark smudge in the mirror. Nothing. I had to pull over. I couldn't drive. I swerved onto the wide gravel shoulder, put the car in park, and just sat there, trembling. The wind rocked the car. I realized I was crying, silent tears just streaming down my face. I wasn't sobbing. It was just this pure physical reaction of terror. I felt like I was going to be sick. I fumbled for my phone in the passenger seat. My fingers were numb and clumsy. I called Mark. It rang a few times, and when he answered, his voice was cheerful, asking if I was home already. I couldn't form words at first. I just made a strangled sound. "Hey, you there?" he said. "Mark," I finally gasped. I just saw something." "Saw what? Are you okay? You sound weird." I tried to explain. The words tumbled out in a jumble. There was this thing on the road. It was huge. It jumped the fence. It just vaulted over it like it was nothing. "What was it, a deer? An elk?" he asked, his tone shifting from confusion to mild concern. No, it wasn't an animal. Not like any animal. It was running on 2 legs. It was so tall, and it just put its hand on the post and jumped over the barbed wire. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear voices in the background. His co-workers. "Babe," he said, his voice lowering. "Are you sure? It was probably just a big elk. You know they can jump fences." "It wasn't an elk," I said, my voice rising hysterically. "It wasn't a bear. It was different, the way it moved. It was wrong. It was fast and smooth, and it didn't even look at me." I was sobbing properly now, the fear turning into frustration. He didn't believe me. I could hear it in his voice. Okay, calm down," he said, sounding placating. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm pulled over, past Vernon. There's no one here." "Okay, listen. Maybe you should go back and look. See if there are any tracks or something. Get a picture." The thought of getting out of the car, of walking back toward that canyon, filled me with a fresh wave of pure, undiluted terror. It was a physical revulsion. Every cell in my body was screaming, "No!" "No," I whispered. "No, I can't. I'm not getting out of the car." "Honey, it was probably just—" "I have to go," I interrupted him, my voice shaky but final. "I'm going home." I hung up on him. I never hang up on him. I sat there for another few minutes, trying to get my breathing under control. I locked the car doors, even though I was already in the middle of nowhere. It felt safer. I kept scanning the landscape, the canyon, the field. Everything looked sinister now. Every shadow was a potential hiding place. Every juniper tree looked like it could be standing upright. I finally put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. I drove the rest of the way home like a robot. My hands were glued to the wheel, my knuckles white. I drove 5 miles under the speed limit, my eyes constantly flicking from the road to the ditches on either side. Every time a gust of wind shook the car, I flinched. The empty landscape, which I'd always found kind of beautiful in a stark way, now felt like it was watching me. The prairie felt alive with hidden, malevolent things. The event played on a loop in my head, the dark brown mass, the powerful, loping run, the casual, impossible vault over the fence, the way its body moved, a seamless flow of muscle and purpose. The smell, that awful, heavy smell. I got home just as the first raindrops started to fall. I ran from the car to the house, fumbling with my keys, my heart in my throat again. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing heavily. The house was dark and quiet. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood there in the hallway, listening to the wind moan outside and the rain start to patter against the windows. Mark got home a few hours later. He tried to talk about it again, gently, but I shut him down. I just said I didn't want to talk about it. What was there to say? He thought I'd seen a weird animal and got spooked. He couldn't understand that what I saw wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist. I've only told a couple of people since then. My sister, who just nodded and changed the subject. One friend who's into weird stuff, who got excited and started asking a million questions I couldn't answer. I stopped talking about it because I saw the look in their eyes. The look that says, she's lost it or she's exaggerating, but I know what I saw. I didn't imagine it. I felt it. The terror of that moment is as real to me now as the keyboard under my fingers. It's the feeling of being completely and utterly alone on a vast empty stage and realizing you're not the only actor, that something else is out there with you, something you can't explain, something that operates on a set of rules you don't understand. And the most chilling part, the thing that keeps me up at night, isn't just what it was, but the sheer, effortless power it displayed. It wasn't running from anything, it wasn't chasing anything. It was just moving through its world, and for 10 seconds our worlds intersected. And I keep thinking about that fence. I keep thinking about how it just put its hand down and vaulted over like it was nothing. And I think, if it can do that, what else can it do? And what if, next time, it doesn't just cross the road? What if it decides to come towards the car? I never found out. I never looked for evidence. I just drove away. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is right, I can still smell it. Story 8. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out of my head and into words. Writing it down might make it feel less like a fever dream that's been stuck on repeat behind my eyes for the past however long it's been. My name is Shannon. I live in Bonner County, Idaho. It's beautiful here, you know, all forests and lakes and mountains. You get used to the quiet, the space. You get used to seeing deer in your yard, the occasional moose, even a bear now and then. You think you know the woods. You think you know what's out there. You're wrong. This happened on a Tuesday morning, late last October. The air was already getting that crisp, cold bite to it, and the leaves were just past their peak, a messy carpet of yellow and red on the ground. I'd been babysitting for my neighbor's kid overnight while she worked a double shift at the hospital in Sandpoint. It was nothing weird, just watching cartoons, making mac and cheese, the usual. I left their place a little after 11 in the morning. The kid was off to school, the house was quiet, and I was just tired, looking forward to getting home, making a big cup of coffee, and maybe crashing on the couch for a bit. I was driving my old Jeep Cherokee. It's a tank, but it sits up high. You feel like you can see everything. The road I was on, Sagal Road, is one of those winding two-lane deals that cuts through thick forest, dense pine on both sides, pressing right up against the asphalt. In some spots, the canopy is so thick it feels like you're driving through a tunnel even in the middle of the day. The sun was out, but it was that low, weak autumn sun that throws long, crazy shadows and doesn't really warm you up. I had the heater on, just my fingertips on the wheel, my mind already halfway home thinking about that coffee. I remember the radio was playing some old country song, but it was just static-filled noise in the background. I wasn't really listening. I came around a gentle left-hand curve. The road dips down a little there before rising again, and that's when it happened. Something bolted out of the trees on my right. It was so fast, so unbelievably fast, that my brain didn't even have time to process it as a shape at first. It was just a blur of dark motion, a streak shooting across the road maybe 10 feet in front of my bumper. I didn't even have time to hit the brakes. My foot just slammed down on instinct, but it was already past. For a split second, my mind grabbed onto the first familiar thing it could find. A cat, a big cat, a mountain lion. That was it. It had that kind of fluid, powerful speed, but in the very next heartbeat, as the jeep coasted forward and the thing passed directly through a shaft of sunlight cutting through the trees, I saw it, really saw it. It wasn't a cat. It was massive. The top of its back was level with the top of my bumper. My jeep isn't a monster truck, but that still puts this thing at what? 4 feet tall at the shoulder, maybe more. It was built like a tank, but a tank that could move like a sprinter. Its body was all thick, roped muscle, like a powerlifter's. The head was blocky, not pointed like a wolf's, not sleek like a cat's. It was just a solid, squarish block set on a powerful neck, and the color. God, the color is what gets me. In the shadow of the trees, it had just looked dark. But in that one moment of sun, I saw it was this deep, rich maroon, like old dried blood. And all over that maroon were these patterns, rosettes, like a leopard's spots, but darker, almost black. And they seemed to blend into the maroon base. The coat wasn't sleek and shiny. It had a thick, almost coarse look to it, like the fur on a bison. It crossed the 2-lane road in 2, maybe 3 of those huge ground-eating strides. Its legs were thick, its gait was effortless, like it was just loping, not even running for its life. There was no sound, no panting, no snarl, no thud of paws on asphalt, just this silent, terrifying grace. Then it was gone. It hit the tree line on the left side of the road and vanished into the underbrush, like it had never been there at all. No crackle of branches, no rustle of leaves, nothing. It just dissolved into the shadows. My jeep rolled to a stop right about where it had crossed. My heart wasn't just pounding. It felt like a wild animal was trapped in my chest, slamming against my ribs, trying to get out. I couldn't breathe. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel the cold, hard plastic of the wheel under my fingers, the slight vibration of the idle engine running through my palms. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where it had been. The spot of asphalt was just asphalt. A few leaves skittered across it. The forest was silent, eerily silent. No birds, no squirrels chattering, nothing. It was like the whole world had frozen solid the moment that thing appeared and hadn't started up again. My mind was screaming, trying to file what I'd just seen into a category. A bear? No. The shape was all wrong, the gait was wrong, the color was wrong. A moose? Absolutely not. A wolf? Don't be stupid. This was something else. Something that wasn't supposed to be here, something that wasn't supposed to be anywhere. The thought that hit me, the one that sent a cold jolt straight down my spine into my gut, was that it was too big. It was just too damn big to be anything I knew. And that pattern, that rosette pattern, what animal in North America has a coat like that? None. Zero. I started to shake. Not a little tremble, but a full body, can't control it, shudder. My teeth started chattering. I felt cold, a deep internal cold that the Jeep's heater couldn't touch. I remember looking into my rearview mirror, half expecting to see it standing in the middle of the road behind me, watching me. The road was empty. I don't know how long I sat there. A minute? 5? Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, some primal part of my brain kicked in and screamed at me to move, to get out of there. I shoved the gear shift into drive, and my foot, which felt like a block of wood, pressed down on the gas. The Jeep lurched forward. I drove too fast, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, to the sides of the road, expecting to see it keeping pace with me in the trees. Every shadow between the trunks looked like it was moving. Every dark stump was a crouching shape. The rest of the drive home is a blur. I just remember the overwhelming need to get behind a locked door. I pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and practically fell out of the Jeep. I ran to my front door, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I got inside, slammed the door shut, and threw the deadbolt. I stood there for a long time, my back against the door, just listening to the sound of my own ragged breathing. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand was trembling so much I sloshed water all over the counter. I tried to drink it, but my throat was too tight. I just stood there, holding the cold glass, feeling the condensation on my fingers. That's when the full weight of it hit me. The terror wasn't just in the moment, it was in the aftermath, the realization. I had seen something that shouldn't exist. I had looked directly at a creature that has no place on any wildlife chart, for this state, for this continent, and it had looked purposeful. It wasn't scared, it wasn't running from me. It was just going from one part of the forest to another, and I happened to be in the way. I called my mom later that day. I tried to sound calm. I said, "Mom, you're not going to believe what I almost hit on Sagal Road this morning." She said, "What, a deer?" I took a breath. No. I don't know what it was. It was huge, like as tall as my Jeep. It was maroon with black spots. It moved like a cat, but it wasn't a cat. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she laughed, a gentle, dismissive sound. "Oh, Shannon, you were probably just tired. It was probably a big dog or a shadow. You know how the light plays tricks out there in the morning." I didn't argue. What was the point? I knew what I'd seen. I was sober. I was alert. I'd had a full night's sleep. I wasn't on any medication. There was no trick of the light. The light was what had shown me the truth, and that's the thing that haunts me the most. This wasn't my first weird thing. I've lived here my whole life. There have been other times hiking where I felt that prickling on the back of my neck, that feeling of being watched so intensely it feels like a physical pressure. Times I've heard wood knocks in the deep woods, rhythmic ones that didn't sound like any tree falling naturally. Once, a few years back, I found a set of footprints in the mud by a creek bed after a spring thaw. They were huge, way bigger than a man's boot, and they only went for about 20 feet before they just stopped, as if whatever made them had climbed a tree or just vanished. I'd always brushed those things off. An overactive imagination, the woods being woods. But now I can't. That creature on the road tied all those disconnected weird moments together with a single, terrifying thread. The image of it is burned into my brain, the way the sunlight lit up that maroon and black rosette pattern, the sheer, solid mass of its body as it moved, the absolute silence of it. I keep going back to that spot on Sagal Road. I slow down every time I approach that curve. I look into the trees, searching for a glimpse of maroon, for a shadow that moves wrong. I never see anything. The woods have gone back to normal. The birds sing, the squirrels run around, but I know different now. I know what's in there. I know that our maps still have blank spaces, and Bonner County is one of them. The enigma of this place isn't just a story anymore. It's a memory. A physical thing I saw with my own 2 eyes, 10 feet in front of my car on a Tuesday morning in October. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling outside, I lie in bed and I wonder if it remembers me too. I wonder if it saw my face, pale and shocked behind the windshield. I wonder if it's out there right now, moving through the dark pines, that deep maroon coat just another shadow among shadows. I don't have an explanation. I don't have a neat ending. It happened, I saw it, and I have to live with that. Story 9. I was 13 years old. My brother was 11. This was back in the late 90s, a summer that had been nothing but heat and boredom up until that one day. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because my mum had just done the big grocery run the day before, and we were already driving her crazy, so she basically shoved us out the door after breakfast and told us not to come back until we had a colander full of raspberries for a pie. We lived near White Meadow Lake in New Jersey, and there was this spot we knew, a tangled, overgrown patch of brambles at the edge of the woods that bordered the lake. It wasn't deep woods, not really. You could still hear the occasional car on the road behind us, but it was wild enough to feel like an adventure. The air was thick and humid, the kind that makes your t-shirt stick to your back before you even start moving. I was wearing these old green shorts and a grey t-shirt that was too big for me, and my brother, he had on his favourite red baseball cap, the one he never took off. The raspberry bushes were heavy with fruit, these deep red gems that practically fell into your hands if you were careful. We had our plastic colanders, the white ones with the little holes, and we were just focused on the task, our fingers getting stained pink, the juice sweet and tangy when you sneaked one into your mouth. We weren't talking much, just the occasional "got a big one over here" or a complaint about the thorns scratching our arms. It was peaceful, normal. The kind of boring summer day you look back on and wish you could have back. The first thing that was off was the silence. I didn't even notice it at first, not consciously. But at some point, I realized the constant background buzz of insects had just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch. The birdsong from the trees had cut out too. It was just quiet, a heavy, waiting kind of quiet. I remember looking up at my brother, and he was frozen too, his hand halfway to a cluster of berries. He felt it as well. We didn't say anything, just looked at each other, our eyes asking the same question. Then we heard the movement. It wasn't a small animal sound. It wasn't a squirrel rustling or a bird flapping. This was a heavy, deliberate crunch and snap of branches from the other side of the thick raspberry bushes. Something big was moving back there in the denser undergrowth, something that wasn't trying to be quiet. My heart, which had been beating a normal rhythm, just kicked up a gear, a hard, fast thumping in my chest that I could feel in my throat. Probably a deer, I whispered to my brother, trying to sound like I believed it. He just shook his head, his eyes wide, fixed on the wall of green leaves and thorny canes in front of us. The sound came again, closer this time. It wasn't the light, skittish step of a deer. It was a slow, powerful planting of weight, a deep thud with each step. We both slowly, so slowly, got to our feet. Our colanders were on the ground, a few raspberries spilling out onto the dirt. We couldn't see anything through the dense bushes, but we could hear it breathing. That was the next thing, this low, wet, rumbling sound, like air moving through a huge, congested chest. It wasn't a growl, not exactly. It was just breathing, and it was right there. Then the bushes directly in front of us, maybe 15 feet away, started to shake. Not like the wind was blowing them. They were being pushed aside from the other side. The tops of the tall canes were swaying violently. My brother made a small, choked sound in the back of his throat, a tiny whimper. I think I stopped breathing altogether. My legs felt like they were made of wood, rooted to the spot, and then it stood up. It didn't crouch and rise. One moment the bushes were shaking, and the next, this thing just unfolded. It was massive. I can't even do the size justice with words. It was like a wall of darkness suddenly blocking out the sun behind it. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, like a football player's pads times 10, and they were covered in this shaggy matted hair. It wasn't brown or black like a bear. It was a dark, almost blackish grey, like wet charcoal. The hair was long and looked clumped in places, with bits of leaves and twigs stuck in it. Its head was huge and kind of cone-shaped, sitting directly on those massive shoulders with no real neck to speak of. I couldn't see ears or much of a nose, but its eyes. I will never ever forget its eyes. They were set deep under a heavy brow, and they were dark. But as I stared, frozen solid, I saw a faint red glow from within them. It wasn't like a laser pointer or a light bulb. It was a deep, smoldering red, like the last embers of a dying fire. It was a sickening, wrong color for an eye. It felt intelligent. It was looking right at us, and I felt that gaze like a physical weight, pinning me in place. My brother was standing slightly to my left, and I heard him gasp, a sharp, horrified intake of air. I managed to tear my own eyes away from the creature's face for a split second to look at him. He was staring, his face a mask of pure terror, his mouth hanging open. He was pointing, his hand trembling violently. He wasn't pointing at the creature's face, but lower. His eyes, my brother whispered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. There's blood coming from his eyes. I looked back, my brother was right. From the inner corners of both of those horrible, glowing red eyes, thick, dark lines of what could only be blood were tracing paths down through the shaggy hair on its cheeks. It wasn't pouring, but it was a steady, viscous trickle, stark and terrifying against the dark fur. The creature didn't make a sound. It didn't roar or snarl. It just stood there at its full, terrifying height, looking down at us with those bleeding, glowing eyes. The silence was worse than any noise it could have made. The smell hit me then, a wave of it that made my stomach lurch. It was a mix of things, wet dog, but 100 times stronger, mixed with the metallic tang of old blood and the rotten, sweet smell of decay, like a long dead animal left in the sun. It was the smell of something ancient and filthy and wrong. I felt so small. I wasn't just scared. I was utterly diminished. This thing made me feel like an insect. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. It was like I was paralyzed, my brain short-circuiting from the sheer impossibility of what I was seeing. My skin was crawling, covered in goosebumps, and a cold sweat broke out all over my body, despite the summer heat. My bladder felt weak, and I had to concentrate with everything I had not to wet myself. It took a step. It didn't crunch on the undergrowth. That was the other thing that sent a fresh, ice-cold bolt of terror through me. For something that big, its step was completely silent. Its foot, I caught a glimpse of it as it moved. It was wide and flat, and it just settled into the leaf litter without a sound. It was like it wasn't really touching the ground. It took another step and then another, moving not towards us, but at an angle, starting to circle around the raspberry patch. It was moving away, but the way it moved was so deliberate, so fluid and quiet for its size, that it was somehow even more frightening than if it had charged. It was then that the spell broke. The moment it turned its head slightly, its bloody gaze leaving us for a second, the paralysis shattered. I don't know which one of us moved first. I think we both did at the exact same time. There was no signal, no run. We just ran. I dropped my colander. My brother dropped his. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just pumped my legs as hard as I ever had in my life, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would burst. My lungs burned, sucking in air that still carried that horrible, rotten smell. I could hear my brother right behind me, his footsteps pounding, his breathing coming in ragged, sobbing gasps. We crashed through the rest of the brambles, thorns tearing at our clothes and skin, but we didn't feel a thing. The only thing that existed was the need to get away, to put as much distance between us and that thing as possible. We burst out of the tree line and into the open field that led to our neighborhood. The sunlight felt alien and too bright. We didn't stop running. We sprinted across that field, past the old oak tree, across 2 backyards, not caring about property lines or anything. We didn't stop until we slammed into our own back door, fumbling with the handle, falling into the kitchen in a heap of terror and exhaustion. My mom was at the sink. She turned around, her face going from surprised to alarmed. "What on earth is wrong with you two? You're white as sheets, and you're all scratched up. Where are the berries?" We just stood there, panting, unable to speak. What could we say? That we saw a monster with bloody eyes? We knew, without even discussing it, that we couldn't say it. The words wouldn't come. The fear was a physical lump in my throat, choking me. We got scared. I finally managed to stammer out, my voice shaky and high-pitched. By a big dog. It was a pathetic lie, but it was all I had. My mom sighed, annoyed, and told us to go clean up. We didn't talk about it. Not that day, not for years after. We just went to our separate rooms and stayed there. The image of that dark, shaggy, impossibly tall figure, the silent steps, and those bleeding, glowing red eyes burned into our minds forever. We never went back to that raspberry patch. Ever. And to this day, more than 20 years later, if I close my eyes, I can still see it standing there, and I can still feel that absolute, soul-crushing terror of being so completely and utterly small in its presence. I still don't know what it was. I don't think I want to know. Story 10. I was 12 years old. We lived on a small farm tucked away in the Ozarks, a good 10 miles from the nearest town. Our property line butted right up against the Mark Twain National Forest. It was just a wall of trees, thick and dark, stretching on forever. I was used to it. I'd grown up with those woods as my backyard. I knew the sounds, the crickets, the owls, the rustle of a possum or a raccoon in the underbrush. I wasn't a scared kid. You can't be, living out there. This particular day, I'd spent the afternoon at our nearest neighbor's place, the Millers. They lived about a mile down the gravel road. I was walking back home as the sun was starting to dip down. It was that time of day we call dusk, but it's really just the long, slow surrender of light. The sky was turning a deep orange and purple behind the trees, and the shadows were getting long and stretched out like they were tired. The air had that cool, damp smell that comes before a real night sets in. I was walking along, kicking at loose stones, not thinking about much of anything. I remember the crunch of my sneakers on the gravel, a real steady rhythm. I was almost to the dip in the road, this little hollow where water would run across after a heavy rain. It was always a few degrees cooler down in that spot. That's when I heard it. It was a sound from the woods to my left. A heavy, deliberate crunch. Not the light, skittering sound of a squirrel or a rabbit. This was a weighty sound, a thump. Then the snap of a good-sized twig. My first thought, my absolute first, normal thought, was that it was our dog, Buster. He was a big, shaggy mutt who loved to follow me around, and sometimes he'd trail me to the Millers and then get distracted by a smell in the woods on the way back. So I stopped walking. I turned my head towards the sound, peering into the trees. It was already dark in there, a deep, tangled gloom. I couldn't see anything moving. "Buster!" I called out. My voice sounded small in the big quiet of the evening. "Come on, boy. Heel!" The sound stopped. Nothing. No rustle. No movement. It was just silent. Not even the crickets were chirping now that I thought about it. The whole forest had gone quiet. That was the first little prickle of fear, like a cold needle on the back of my neck. The woods are never silent, not unless something's wrong. I stood there for a few seconds, listening so hard my ears started to ring with the silence. Maybe it was a deer, a big buck. They could freeze up just like that. That's what I told myself. It's just a deer. Feeling a little silly and a little unnerved, I started walking again, a bit quicker this time. My house was just on the other side of the hollow, maybe another 5 minutes away. I just had to get up this little rise. I started up the slope out of the hollow, my breath coming a little faster from the incline and the low-grade fear that was starting to hum in my veins. My heart was beating in my ears, a dull thudding sound. As I reached the crest of the rise, my foot scuffed a bigger piece of gravel, sending it skittering noisily down the road behind me, and that's when I heard the other step. It wasn't from the woods anymore. It was on the road, right behind me. The sound was unmistakable, the heavy, solid crunch of a foot pressing down on the loose gravel of the road. It was so close, way too close. My blood went from humming to outright freezing in my veins. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. It wasn't Buster. Buster would have padded up to me by now, his tail wagging. This was something else. I stopped dead. My body locked up. I couldn't have run if I'd wanted to. It was like every muscle had been filled with concrete. I was just a kid, standing on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, with something standing directly behind me. I could feel it. I can't explain how, but you can just feel when something is that close. You can sense the space it's occupying. The air felt different, heavier. My eyes were staring straight ahead, down the road towards the warm, yellow lights of my house. They seemed a million miles away. Slowly, so slowly it felt like it took an hour, I dragged my eyes down, looking at the road just behind my heels, and I saw its feet. They were huge. I'm not talking about big like a man's feet. I'm talking about massive, long, and covered in coarse, dark hair. They were shaped like human feet, but they were so much broader, with the toes splayed out. They were planted firmly on the gravel, and they were so close I could have taken one step back and kicked them. The sight of those feet is burned into my brain. The dirt caked around the ankles, the way the hair was matted and thick. They were real, they were solid, they were right there. That's when the full-blown, mind-shattering terror hit me. It was a physical wave that washed over me, so powerful it made me feel dizzy and sick to my stomach, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't an animal I knew. This wasn't anything I knew. I had to see, I had to know what it was. My body was trembling violently, a fine, uncontrollable shake that started deep in my bones. I forced myself to turn my head. My neck creaked like an old gate hinge. It was standing right there within arm's reach. It was tall, so tall I had to crane my neck way back to look up at it. The top of my head wouldn't have even reached its waist. It was powerfully built, with shoulders that were incredibly broad, and its body was covered in the same coarse, dark hair I'd seen on its feet. It was like a living shadow, a mass of muscle and fur. But it was the face I'll never forget. It had a face that was almost human, but stretched and wrong. The jaw was heavy, the nose was flat, and the eyes. Oh God, the eyes. They were the most horrifying part. They weren't black like an animal's. The part around the pupil was this milky, reddish-white color, like a raw piece of meat. And right in the center of that were two piercing, intelligent blue pupils. They were staring right down at me. It didn't snarl, it didn't growl, it didn't make a sound. It just stood there looking at me, and I stood there frozen, looking back at it. I could smell it. It was a wild smell, like damp earth, like old leaves, like a wet dog, but muskier, more pungent. It was the smell of the deep woods of a place where no people go. I thought it was going to kill me. There was not a single doubt in my mind. This creature, this thing, could have reached out one of its huge hands and snapped my neck without any effort at all. I could feel the sheer power radiating off it. I was nothing. I was a bug. I was completely and utterly helpless. I don't know how long we stood like that. It could have been 2 seconds or 2 minutes. Time had lost all meaning. My brain was just screaming one word: run. But my legs wouldn't listen. They were like jelly. Somehow I managed to make my body move. It wasn't a run. It was a stumble, a clumsy, panicked shuffle. I wrenched my gaze away from those terrible blue eyes, and I forced one foot in front of the other, my legs shaking so bad I was sure I'd fall. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just focused on the lights of the house, which now seemed like the only safe place in the entire universe. I took a few stumbling steps, expecting at any second to feel a massive hand clamp down on my shoulder, to be dragged back into the darkness. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought it would burst. I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. I couldn't help it. About 20 feet down the road, a desperate, terrified curiosity took over. I had to know if it was following me. I had to see. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It wasn't on the road anymore. My eyes darted to the edge of the woods, to a big old cedar tree that stood by itself near where the hollow started. It was standing next to the tree, and it was doing something that, to this day, chills me more than anything else. It was showing me how tall it was. It had one of its long, heavily muscled arms raised, and its hand was resting flat against the trunk of the cedar, way up high, near a broken branch that I knew was a good 8 or 9 feet off the ground. It was a casual gesture, like a man leaning against a wall, but it was a display. It was showing me its scale, its height, its reach. It was still looking right at me, those red-white eyes with the blue centers locked onto mine across the distance. Then it just wasn't there anymore. It didn't run into the woods. It didn't duck down. 1 second it was standing by the tree, a solid, real thing. And the next second, the space where it had been was just empty. The woods behind it were just woods again. It was like it had been erased from reality. That's when the last of my strength left me. I turned and I ran. I ran like I've never run before or since. I didn't feel the ground under my feet. I didn't hear my own ragged, sobbing breaths. I just ran for the porch light, for the screen door, for my dad. I burst into the house, my face streaked with tears I didn't remember crying, my whole body trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't even talk. I just grabbed my dad's arm, my fingers digging into his shirt, and I pointed back towards the road. He knew something was terribly wrong. He grabbed his big flashlight and his rifle and went out there. He searched for a long time. He came back and said he hadn't found anything. No tracks, no sign, nothing. He said it was probably a bear, even though we both knew bears don't stand on 2 legs like a man, and they don't have blue eyes, and they don't just vanish. I never walked home from the miller's after dark again. Life went on. I grew up, moved away for college, got a job. I never thought much about it, or I tried not to. I'd packed that memory away in a box in the deepest corner of my mind and tried to forget it. Then, one night, it must have been about 10 years ago, I was flipping through channels on the TV. I landed on one of those documentary shows about cryptozoology. They were talking about Sasquatch. They started describing eyewitness accounts. The height, the powerful build, the coarse, dark hair, and then they mentioned the eyes. A researcher was talking about how some reports, some of the most credible ones, describe the eyes as having a red glow or a reddish sclera, and sometimes even light-colored pupils. I felt the floor drop out from under me. My stomach clenched into a hard, cold knot. I sat there on my couch in my safe, well-lit apartment in the city, and I was 12 years old again on that dirt road, staring up into those reddish-white eyes with the blue pupils. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't my imagination. I knew with a certainty that was both horrifying and relieving exactly what I had seen that day. I didn't sleep that night. I haven't slept well many nights since. The memory isn't faded or fuzzy. It's as sharp and clear and terrifying as it was the moment it happened. I saw it. It saw me. And for a few seconds on a quiet evening in the Ozarks, we just stood there, a scared kid and something from the deep old woods. And I have never, for a single day of my life since, felt completely safe in the dark. Story 11. Okay, I'm just going to type this out. I've never written it down before, never really told anyone except a couple of close friends who just kinda nodded and changed the subject. But I saw a post on here about weird stuff in the woods, and it all came rushing back. This happened to me. I was there. It was the summer of either 1986 or 87. I get those 2 summers mixed up because we did similar projects back to back. I was working for the Forest Service on a road maintenance project in the Snowy Range, which is part of the Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming. My job was basically to assess the condition of this old logging road that was getting washed out and decide if it was worth repairing or if we should just let it return to nature. We were set up midway up the mountain. I had this beat-up old RV that I was using as a base camp. It was a real clunker, smelled like mildew and old coffee, but it had a bed and a small stove, and that was all I needed. The plan was to be out there for about a week, just me and the 2 boys. The boys were my nephew and his friend, both around 8 or 9 years old. I want to be real clear about these kids. They weren't the kind to make stuff up. They were country boys, born and raised. Their families hunted. They'd been taught gun safety since they could walk. They'd already been on proper deer hunts with their fathers. They were solid, quiet kids, comfortable in the woods, in a way most adults aren't. I trusted them. That's the main thing. I trusted their judgment. That particular day, it was bright and sunny, but the air still had that thin, cool mountain bite to it. I remember the smell of pine sap was really strong, mixed with the dry dust from the road. I was busy with my work, bent over some maps and soil samples spread out on the RV's fold-down table. The door was open, letting in the fresh air and the sound of the wind in the trees. The boys were getting restless, cooped up with me, so I told them they could go squirrel hunting. They had a single-shot .22 rifle, just the one between them. They knew the rules: stay together, don't go far, and be back before the light started to fade. They took off, their small frames disappearing into the trees behind the RV, their voices fading quickly into the forest sounds. I went back to my work. I don't know how much time passed. An hour, maybe 2. I was engrossed in figuring out a drainage issue, my head full of gradients and soil compaction. Then I heard it. Not a shout, not a scream, but the sound of running, a frantic, panicked crashing through the undergrowth. It was coming from the direction the boys had gone. I stood up so fast, I knocked my knee against the table leg. I was at the door just as they burst out of the tree line. Their faces were white, absolutely drained of color. They were gasping for air, their chests heaving, their eyes were wide, staring like they'd seen a ghost. No, not a ghost, something else. They ran straight to me, almost collapsing. They were both talking at once, their words tumbling over each other, high-pitched and breathless. "We saw something. In the tree. It looked at us." I got them to sit down on the RV steps, made them drink some water from my canteen. Their hands were shaking so bad they could barely hold the metal cup. I had to calm them down, get them to take turns. My nephew, he was the one who started, his voice trembling but trying so hard to be clear. They said they'd had a good time hunting, hadn't seen any squirrels, and were on their way back to camp. They were just walking, not talking much, just being kids in the woods. The area wasn't super dense. It was fairly open with tall ponderosa pines, the kind where the lower branches are high up and you can see a good distance. But then they came to this one tree. It was different. My nephew described it as an old pine, but its branches were thick and started low, extending almost all the way to the ground, creating a kind of canopy. They were walking past it, maybe 10, 15 feet away, when his friend grabbed his arm and pointed. There, on a thick branch that was only a few feet off the ground, was something. They both stopped dead. At first, they thought it was a bear cub, but it wasn't. It was just sitting there, perched on this big branch. It was small, about their size, so maybe 4 feet tall or so, but it was covered in hair. Dark, almost black hair, but it was long and had a kind of shine to it, like a healthy animal's coat. That's the detail that stuck with me, the shine. They both mentioned it independently, but it wasn't the hair that froze them in their tracks. It was the parts that weren't covered in hair, its face and its hands. The face wasn't like a monkey's or a bear's. It was flatter, more like a person's, but covered in dark, shorter hair, except around the eyes and mouth, and its hands were resting on its knees. They were human-like hands, with fingers and thumbs, not paws. They were dark and looked strong, and it was staring right at them. It wasn't moving its head. Its body was perfectly still, like a statue. But its eyes were moving. They were dark, deep-set, and they shifted. They would look at one boy, then the other, then back. Just the eyes. The rest of it was frozen. My nephew told me, his voice dropping to a whisper even though we were out in the open, that he felt a wave of cold fear wash over him right then. This was a kid who'd walked up on a wounded buck without flinching. He wasn't a scaredy cat, but this was different. This was a deep, primal terror. He said the air just got heavy, and the forest sounds, the birds and the wind, seemed to fade away until there was nothing but silence and this thing staring at them. The friend, the other boy, he whispered to my nephew, "Should I shoot it?" He had the .22 in his hands. He was asking a practical question. That's how they were raised. You see a potential threat, you assess if you need to neutralize it. But my nephew said no. He said, "Let's just go. Let's get back to camp and tell your uncle." That was the decision. Don't engage, just leave. The moment they made that decision, the moment they took a step back to turn and run, the thing moved. It didn't jump down, it dropped. It just let go of the branch and dropped straight to the ground, landing on its feet with a soft thud that they could hear in the dead silence. It was maybe only a few feet away from them now, and then it ran. This is the part they described in the most detail, because they saw it clearly, and for a few seconds, as it fled, it didn't run on all fours like a bear or an ape. It ran on two legs, exactly like a man, a very powerful, fast man, its arms pumped at its sides as it ran, its legs covering ground with these huge, loping strides. It didn't look back. It just crashed through the ferns and low bushes and was gone into the thicker trees in a matter of seconds. The sound of it running away, the snapping of twigs and the rustling, that's what broke the spell. And then they ran. They ran as fast as they ever had in their lives, the fear giving their legs a speed they didn't know they had, not stopping until they burst out of the trees and saw the RV. After they told me all this, sitting there on the steps, still pale and shaking, I did what any rational adult would do. I got my own rifle, a .3006, and I told them to stay put in the RV and lock the door. I went to go look. The walk to that tree felt 1,000 miles long. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of a leaf made my heart jump. The forest, which had felt so peaceful and familiar just an hour before, now felt alien and watchful. I found the tree exactly as they described it. The low, sweeping branch. I could see the scuff marks on the bark where they said it had been sitting. I looked at the ground. I looked hard. The forest floor was a mix of pine needles, old leaves, and soft dirt. There should have been tracks. From the creature dropping down, from where it landed, from its run. There should have been something. There was nothing. I walked the path they said it took. I scanned the ground for any sign, any broken branch that was out of place, any impression. Nothing. It was like it had never been there. The only footprints I could find were the small, clear prints from the boy's own boots. I stayed out there for maybe 20 minutes, my senses on high alert, the rifle feeling both comforting and useless in my hands. The only thing I felt was a profound, creeping unease, a feeling of being watched from the deep shadows between the trees. I finally turned around and went back to the RV. The rest of the day was quiet. We didn't talk about it much. I made them some food, but none of us ate much. We just sat in the RV as the sun went down. The boys were jumpy, flinching at every little noise outside. We ended up packing up and driving down the mountain that night. I made up some excuse about the project being finished early. I just couldn't stay there another minute. In the years since, I've asked them about it separately when they were in their mid-20s. They're grown men now. And they both, without hesitation, without any embellishment, told the exact same story. The low branch, the shiny black hair, the human-like hands and face, the moving eyes, the way it dropped and ran like a man, the sheer gut-wrenching terror of that locked gaze. They believe, to this day, that they saw something that shouldn't exist. And I believe them, because I saw the terror in their eyes that day. It was a real, physical thing. It was in the RV with us. I felt it. I saw the way the forest felt wrong after. I've spent my whole life in the woods, and I know the feeling of normal woods, and the feeling of woods where something is off. And that day, something was very, very off. I don't know what it was. I don't use the word Bigfoot lightly. It sounds crazy, but I have no other explanation. Two solid, steady, mountain-wise boys saw something that scared them so badly the memory was burned into them forever, and I was there to see the aftermath, to feel the chill that it left behind. I never found any proof, no tracks, no hair, nothing, just the story, and the absolute unshakable certainty in the eyes of those two boys, and that's enough for me. I know what they saw. I just don't know what to call it. Story 12. It was one of those late October afternoons where the sky can't decide if it wants to be grey or blue. So it just settles for this washed-out pale color that makes everything look tired. Me and my buddy were headed back from a pointless parts run for his project car, a '72 Chevelle that was more rust than metal at this point. We were on Brownsville Road, that long, winding stretch that feels like it goes on forever before it finally meets up with State Route 16. The trees were mostly bare, just these skeletal black branches clawing at the sky, and the few leaves left were this sad brown color. It was cold enough that we had the heater on, blowing that weird, slightly dusty smell that old car heaters always have. I was driving my pickup, a beat-up Ford that had seen better days, but it ran okay. My friend was in the passenger seat, messing with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't just static or preaching. We weren't talking much, just kind of existing in that comfortable silence you get when you've known someone for years. I remember my hands were at 10 and 2 on the wheel, the vinyl cold through my gloves. I was just following the curves of the road, not really thinking about anything, just watching the yellow line zip past under the hood. Then we came around this one curve. It's not a sharp curve, more of a long, gentle bend to the left. And right there, in the middle of our lane, was something squatting. It's hard to even find the right words for it. My brain just sort of short-circuited. It was big. That's the first thing that registered. It was hunched over, squatting on its haunches like a goddamn frog or something, but huge. Its back was to us, and it was covered in this thick, matted hair. It wasn't brown like a bear. It was darker, almost black, but a dirty black, like wet charcoal. The posture was what got me. It wasn't standing, it was crouched right down in the road, its arms hanging loose between its knees, and its head was down, like it was looking at something on the asphalt. It was just there. 1 second the road was empty, the next this thing was filling my windshield. I didn't even have time to scream, my body just reacted. My foot slammed off the gas and stomped on the brake, but I didn't lock them up. It was more of a hard, jarring slowdown, the kind that makes the seatbelt dig into your shoulder and your stomach lurch. I braced for impact, my arms going rigid, my whole body tensing up, waiting for the horrible thud, the crunch of metal and bone. I was maybe 10 feet away from it, close enough to see the way its hair was clumped together in places, close enough to see the sheer mass of it. It had to be 7, 8 feet tall if it stood up, and built thick, like a power lifter. And then it was gone. It didn't run, it didn't jump, it didn't fade away, it just wasn't there anymore. It vanished in the space of a single heartbeat. One moment, this massive, impossible thing was squatting in the road, and the next, there was nothing but empty asphalt. The truck rolled to a stop right about where it had been. The engine was still running. I could hear it ticking. I could hear my own heart hammering in my ears, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. I was just staring at the empty spot on the road, my brain screaming that this wasn't possible. My friend made a sound next to me, a choked-off gasp. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, his voice thin and shaky. I couldn't answer. I just sat there, my hands glued to the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel a cold sweat break out all over my body, a prickling sensation that started at the back of my neck and spread down my spine. My mouth was dry as dust. "Did you see that?" he asked, louder this time, turning to look at me. His face was pale, his eyes wide. I just nodded, my head moving in a stiff, jerky motion. I finally managed to unclench one hand from the wheel and pointed a trembling finger at the rearview mirror. "Look," I croaked. He twisted in his seat to look out the back window, and I angled the mirror down to see the road behind us. Nothing. Just the empty road, the yellow line, the trees, no movement, no sign that anything had ever been there. No sound either, no crashing in the woods, no footsteps, nothing. It was the silence that was the worst part. It felt heavy, like a blanket smothering us. We sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, but it was probably only 30 seconds. Neither of us said a word. I just kept staring at the spot, expecting it to reappear, expecting my eyes to adjust and show me some logical explanation. A fallen log, a weird shadow, a big dog, but there was nothing. The road was just a road. Finally, I pushed down on the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, and I drove slowly, creeping past the spot. I kept my eyes glued to the woods on either side, my head on a swivel. Every shadow between the trees looked like a crouching shape. Every stump looked like a head. "What the hell was it?" my friend asked again, his voice a little steadier now, but still filled with a deep, unsettled fear. "I don't know," I said, and my own voice sounded strange to me. "A bear?" "It wasn't a bear," he said immediately, shaking his head. "No bear sits like that. It was like a baboon. You know how they squat, but it was way bigger and darker." He was right. That was the exact posture, a baboon's squat. But the size was all wrong. This thing was massive, built on a completely different scale, and the color was wrong. And what would a baboon, or anything like it, be doing in the middle of rural Ohio in late October? We started throwing out other ideas, our voices low and hurried, like we were afraid something might hear us. A person in a big fur coat? No, the proportions were wrong, and the way it vanished, it didn't get up and run. It was just gone. A trick of the light. We both saw it, clear as day. We both saw the same details. There was no discussion, no "did you see the head?" or "what color was it?" We both knew what we had seen. It was a shared, immediate horror. We drove for another 5 minutes in silence, the only sound the hum of the tires on the pavement. The normal world started to seep back in. We passed a mailbox, a house set back from the road, a tractor sitting in a field, but it all felt fake, like a painted backdrop. The real thing, the true thing, was that image burned into my brain. That dark, hairy mass squatting in the road, head down, like it owned the place. I kept checking the rear-view mirror. Not just a glance, but a long, searching stare every few seconds. My neck was getting sore from whipping my head around. My friend was doing the same thing, looking out his window, then the back window, then his window again. We were both on high alert, our bodies buzzing with adrenaline that had nowhere to go. The terror of the moment of impact had been replaced by a deeper, colder fear. The fear of the unknown. What was it? Where did it go? Why was it there? The fact that it had vanished without a trace was somehow more frightening than if it had charged the truck. If it had charged, it would have been a thing, an animal, something that obeyed the laws of physics. It would have been scary, but it would have been understandable. This was different. This was something that shouldn't exist, and its disappearance proved it. I remember the physical sensation so clearly. The cold sweat had dried, leaving my skin feeling sticky and cold. My heart was still beating too fast, a fluttery, anxious rhythm in my chest. My hands were shaking, and I had to grip the wheel tighter to steady them. I could feel every little vibration of the truck through the steering column, every bump in the road. My senses felt raw, overloaded. We finally reached the intersection with State Route 16. I came to a full stop, even though there was no stop sign for us. I just sat there, looking both ways down the bigger road. Cars passed by, normal people going to normal places. It felt like we were coming back from another planet. "I guess we just keep going," my friend said, his voice flat. I nodded and turned onto the highway, accelerating to match the speed of traffic. The sun was starting to go down, casting long, deep shadows across the fields. Every shadow looked like it had a shape in it. Every cluster of trees at the edge of a field looked like a potential hiding place. We didn't talk about it much after that. What was there to say? We both knew we hadn't seen a bear, or a person, or a deer. We had seen something that defied explanation. The conversation just petered out into a heavy, uncomfortable silence. We were both trapped in our own heads, replaying those 2 seconds over and over. He got quiet for a long time, just staring out his window. Then he said, very softly, "It didn't even look at us." He was right. Its back was to us the whole time. Its head was down. It was like we were completely irrelevant, like it was so focused on something on the ground in front of it that a 2-ton truck bearing down on it wasn't even worth its attention, and then it decided to stop existing in our reality. That thought has haunted me more than anything else. We weren't a threat. We weren't even worth acknowledging. We were just there, and it was there, and then it wasn't. I dropped him off at his place. He just got out of the truck, gave me a quick nod, and went inside without a word. I sat in my driveway for a long time after I got home, just staring at the garage door. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to move. I felt like if I stayed perfectly still, I could maybe hold on to the world, keep it from spinning off into the madness that I now knew was lurking just on the other side of a curve in the road. The image is seared into my mind, that squatting posture, the sheer impossible bulk of it, the way the dark matted hair seemed to absorb the light, and the silence after, the absolute total silence. I still drive down Brownsville Road sometimes when I have to. I slow down before that curve every single time. My heart starts to beat a little faster. My hands get a little clammy. I brace myself, not for an impact, but for the sight of it again, or for the sight of nothing, which is somehow worse. I never see anything. The road is always just a road, but I know what was there. For 2 seconds, I know exactly what was there, squatting in the middle of the asphalt like it had every right to be, before it decided to stop being there and left me with a fear of the dark spaces between the trees that I know will never, ever go away. Story 13. Then, just a few nights ago, something else went down. This one day, it started like any other. I woke up early, the sun just peeking over the ridges, casting long shadows across the meadow. I did my usual rounds, checked on the remaining horses, fed them, made sure the fences were solid. The silence out here is usually peaceful, but that day it felt heavier, like the air was waiting for something. I've got 2 dogs, Rusty and Bella. They're mutts, part shepherd, part who knows what, but they're good company. Rusty's the older one, calm and steady, while Bella's still young, always bouncing around. They stick close to the cabin, barking at squirrels or the wind, nothing out of the ordinary. As the day wore on, everything seemed normal. I spent the afternoon fixing a saddle in the shade of the porch, the dogs lounging at my feet. The heat was building, the kind that makes the sweat stick to your shirt, and by evening I was tired. I remember thinking how quiet it was, too quiet. Usually you hear birds or the distant rustle of deer, but that evening it was like the whole world had gone mute. I didn't think much of it then, just figured it was one of those days. Night fell fast, the way it does up here in the mountains. The temperature dropped and I lit a lamp inside the cabin. I sat by the window for a bit, staring out into the dark. The dogs were outside, like always. They've got a doghouse near the front, but they often sleep on the porch or wander a little. I trust them to alert me if anything's off. Around 9 o'clock I decided to turn in. My bed's in the corner of the cabin, and I could hear the wind picking up, whistling through the cracks in the logs. I drifted off, but it wasn't a deep sleep. My mind kept drifting back to those horses, their bodies ripped open, and that unease settled in my gut. Then, sometime late, must have been past midnight, I woke up to the dogs barking. Not their usual yapping at a raccoon or something. This was different. Loud, frantic, like they were screaming. I bolted upright in bed, my heart already hammering against my ribs. The sound was coming from right outside, near the house. Rusty and Bella were going crazy, their barks sharp and panicked. I've heard them scared before, like when a bear wandered through once. But this was worse. It was like they were terrified out of their minds. I swung my legs out of bed, the wooden floor cold under my bare feet. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my boots. I didn't bother with a shirt, just pulled on my jeans and grabbed the shotgun I keep by the door. The barking was so intense, it felt like it was vibrating through the walls. I remember thinking, what the hell is out there? My mind raced back to the horses, that same gut-wrenching fear bubbling up. I peered out the window, but it was pitch black. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the only light was from my lamp inside, casting weak shadows. I cracked the door open, the chill air hitting me like a slap. "Rusty! Bella!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the noise. They were barking non-stop, and I could hear them moving around, paws scraping on the gravel. Then just like that, the barking stopped, not faded away, but cut off. 1 second, it was a deafening roar, and the next, silence. Complete, dead silence. It was so sudden it made my ears ring, my breath caught in my throat. I stood there, frozen, listening. Nothing, not a whimper, not a rustle, just the wind howling like it was mocking me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I stepped out onto the porch, the shotgun gripped tight in my hands. The cold seeped into my skin and I shivered, but it wasn't just from the temperature. The air felt thick, heavy, like something was watching me. I scanned the darkness, but I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. "Rusty, Bella," I called again, my voice shaky. No response. Nothing. I took a step forward, my boots crunching on the gravel. The lamp from the cabin threw a faint glow, enough to see the outline of the doghouse and the trees beyond. That's when I saw them, or rather what was left of them. They were lying near the side of the house, not moving. I rushed over, my stomach churning. As I got closer, the details hit me like a punch. Rusty and Bella were dead. Their bodies were twisted in ways that made no sense, like they'd been thrown against the house. Bella was slumped against the wall, her head at an angle that shouldn't be possible, and Rusty was a few feet away, his legs splayed out. There was blood everywhere, dark and splattered on the wooden siding and the ground. I dropped to my knees, the shotgun clattering beside me. My hands reached out, but I pulled back. I didn't want to touch them, but I had to. Rusty's fur was matted with blood, and when I turned him slightly, I saw that his ribs were caved in, like something huge had smashed him. Bella's neck was broken. I could see the bone poking through the skin. The smell hit me then, metallic and coppery, mixed with the scent of pine and dirt. It made me gag. I felt dizzy, the world spinning around me. This wasn't like an animal attack, no bites, no tearing. It was like they'd been swung hard against the house. The force must have been incredible. The wood siding had cracks in it, splintered where they'd hit. I sat back on my heels, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My eyes stung and I realized I was crying. These weren't just dogs, they were my companions, the ones who'd kept me company through long nights. Now they were gone, and in such a brutal way. I looked around, my head whipping side to side, expecting to see something in the shadows, but there was nothing, just the dark, and that silence, deeper than before. The wind had died down, like even it was holding its breath. My mind started racing. What could have done this? A bear. But like with the horses, there are no grizzlies here, and black bears don't act like this. They'd maybe maul, but not leave bodies like this, untouched except for the impact. A mountain lion. They're stealthy, but they'd have dragged one off, not left both here. And the way they were swung, it would take something massive, with strength I can't even imagine. That's when the Bigfoot thought crept back in. It sounds crazy, I know, but after the horses, it's the only thing that fits. Something out there in the Sierras. Something that doesn't want to be seen but makes its presence known in the worst ways. I forced myself to stand up, my legs wobbly. I picked up the shotgun, my fingers trembling so bad I could barely hold it. I backed toward the cabin, my eyes glued to the trees. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I got inside and slammed the door shut, locking it even though I know it wouldn't stop, whatever did this. I leaned against the door, my chest heaving. The cabin felt smaller, suffocating. I could still smell the blood on my hands, so I went to the sink and washed them, the water cold, but it didn't help. My skin felt crawly, like I was being watched through the windows. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair by the door, shotgun across my lap. I didn't sleep a wink. Every little noise, the creak of the cabin, the wind picking up again, made me flinch. My mind kept replaying it, the barking, the sudden silence, finding them like that. The physical sensations are what stick with me the most. The cold sweat on my back, the way my heart wouldn't slow down, the ache in my jaw from clenching it so tight. I kept looking out the window, hoping to see something, but also terrified I would. The sky started to lighten around 5 in the morning, grey and gloomy, but I didn't feel any relief. When the sun finally rose, I went back outside. The bodies were still there, stiff and cold. I had to bury them. I grabbed a shovel from the shed, my hands shaking the whole time. I dug a hole near the trees, away from the house. It was hard work, the ground rocky, and each thrust of the shovel felt like a punishment. I wrapped Rusty and Bella in an old blanket and laid them in the hole. As I covered them up, I couldn't help but think about how pointless it all was. They were just dogs, but they didn't deserve this, and I don't deserve this fear that settled deep in my bones. The rest of that day, I didn't do much. I stayed close to the cabin, jumping at every sound. I checked on the horses. They were skittish, like they sensed something too. I tried to eat, but my stomach was in knots. By evening, I was exhausted, but I knew I wouldn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the door, waiting for something that never came. And that's it. Nothing else happened, no more noises, no more attacks, but I'm still here, alone, with this dread hanging over me. I don't know what it was that killed my dogs, just like I don't know what got my horses. Maybe it was Bigfoot, maybe it wasn't. But whatever it is, it's out there, and I can't shake the feeling that it's not done with me. I keep looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something in the trees, but there's nothing. Just the silence and the memory of that night, playing over and over in my head. I can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 14. Okay, so this happened back in late November of 2001. I was living in Somerton, Tennessee at the time, and I'd been bow hunting for years, mostly deer, sometimes other game. That morning, I decided to head out alone to a spot I knew in the vast woods near the Laurel Hill Wildlife Management Area. It's this dense, almost untouched forest that stretches for miles, and I'd hunted there before, but always with buddies or during brighter parts of the day. This time, though, I wanted to go solo, get in early before the sun came up, thinking I'd have a better shot at something big. I woke up around 4 in the morning, the kind of dark that feels heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. My gear was ready, a compound bow I'd had for a few seasons, a quiver of arrows, and my climbing stand strapped to my back. The climbing stand was this metal thing I'd used to get up trees quietly, and I was pretty good at setting it up fast. I remember the chill in the air. Late November in Tennessee can get cold, not freezing, but enough to make your breath fog up. I threw on my camo jacket, laced up my boots, and headed out from my truck, which I'd parked on a dirt road leading into the woods. The walk-in was always the same, dark, quiet, with only the crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional rustle of some small animal. I used a small flashlight to see, but I kept it dim, not wanting to scare off any game. My spot was about a mile in, a place where I'd seen deer trails before. As I walked, the woods felt different that day. Not spooky, just heavier. Like the air was thicker, and every sound seemed amplified. I could hear owls hooting in the distance, and once something scurried off to my right, probably a raccoon or squirrel. But I was used to that stuff. It never bothered me. About halfway to my spot, maybe 30 minutes into the hike, I heard it. To my left, in this thick brush, there was a sound like something big shifting its weight. Not a snap or a crackle, but a deep, heavy movement, like a log rolling over or a large animal standing up. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart already starting to pick up pace. I figured it was a hog. Wild hogs are common out there, and they can be aggressive, but usually they bolt if you make noise. So I took a step to the side, thinking I'd give it space and keep moving, but then it moved with me, step for step. I shifted to the right, and I heard the brush rustle as whatever it was mirrored me. That's when the chill hit me, not just the cold, but this deep, icy feeling that started in my spine and spread out. I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'3", 200 pounds, and I've handled myself in the woods before. But this thing felt heavier, bigger. I could hear its breathing now, this low, rhythmic sound that wasn't like any animal I knew. Then it let out this snort. Not a pig-like grunt, but something deeper, more forceful, like it was pushing air out with intent. It was directed right at me, and I felt it in my chest, like a physical pressure. My hands were shaking, but I managed to knock an arrow onto my bow. I didn't draw it yet, just held it ready. The brush was so thick I couldn't see anything, just shadows and leaves, but I knew it was there, maybe 10, 15 feet away, and it was pacing me. As I started backing away slowly, one careful step at a time, I could hear it moving parallel to me, keeping pace. Not rushing, just matching me. The sound of its footsteps was heavy, like it was walking on two legs, but I couldn't be sure. Every time I paused, it paused. When I sped up a little, it did too. It felt like it was playing with me or testing me, and the whole time I had this overwhelming sense that it was watching me, not just glancing, but studying me, like it knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. I've been scared in the woods before. Once I stumbled on a bear cub and had to back off fast, but this was different. This was a primal fear, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your skin crawl. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold, and my heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I kept backing away, my eyes glued to the brush, but I never saw a shape, just movement, dark, hulking movement. The air smelled different too, musky like wet fur and earth, but stronger, almost pungent. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a small clearing where I usually set up my stand. There was a tall oak tree there, one I'd climbed before. Without thinking, I scrambled up it faster than I ever had in my life. My climbing stand made it easier, but I was fumbling, my fingers slipping on the bark. I could still hear it down below, moving around, that heavy tread circling the tree. I got up about 20 feet, high enough that I felt somewhat safe, and I just clung there, trying to catch my breath. From up in the tree, I could see a bit better, but the undergrowth was so dense that I still couldn't make out what it was. I heard it snort again, this time closer to the base of the tree, and I felt the trunk vibrate slightly, like it was touching it or leaning against it. I had my bow ready, arrow nocked, but I didn't want to shoot blindly. What if it was just a bear? But bears don't pace you like that, and they don't snort with that kind of force. This was something else. I remember the silence between its movements. The woods had gone dead quiet. No owls, no rustling, just this heavy presence below me. I stayed up there for what felt like hours, but it was probably only until the sun started to rise. The sky shifted from black to grey, and slowly light filtered through the trees. As it got brighter, the sounds below stopped. I didn't hear it leave. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone. The normal sounds of the forest slowly returned, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, but I didn't move. I just sat there shivering, my legs cramping from staying in one position. When I finally felt brave enough, I climbed down, my muscles stiff and aching. The ground felt unstable, like it might give way. I looked around the base of the tree, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. Not deer tracks, not bear paws, but something big and human-like, but wider, longer. They were pressed deep into the soil, like whatever made them was heavy, maybe 300 pounds or more. I didn't have a camera or anything to measure, but I remember staring at them, my stomach knotting up. I followed the trail a short way. It led off into the brush where I'd first heard it, and then it just disappeared into thicker vegetation. The rest of that day, I stayed in the woods, but I didn't hunt. I just walked slowly, my bow always in hand, every noise making me jump. I kept expecting it to come back, but nothing happened. The sun rose higher, and the woods felt normal again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midday, I headed back to my truck, my mind racing. I drove home in a daze, and for days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't until later, when I was talking to a friend who's into cryptozoology, that I learned about Sasquatch descriptions. The weight, the pacing, the control it had over the space. It all matched. I'd never believed in that stuff before, but now I can't explain it. I never went back into those woods in the dark again, and even in daylight I stick to the edges. That encounter left me with this deep-seated fear, like a shadow that follows me. To this day, when I'm out hunting, I'll sometimes freeze at a sound, remembering that heavy movement and the feeling of something ancient and unknown watching me. I don't know what it was, but I know it wasn't any animal I've ever met, and that's what haunts me the most. Story 15. It was early June back in 2006, and I was out in Gunnison Valley, Colorado, with my older brother Jason and my younger sister Lauren. We were there for a fossil dig. Our parents were really into that kind of thing, and they'd dragged us along on plenty of trips before. This one felt different from the start, though. The air had this weird stillness to it, like the whole valley was holding its breath. We'd set up camp near the dig site, which was just a scrappy patch of dirt and rock tucked between some pine trees and a steep gully. Our parents had to drive into town for supplies, something about a part for the truck, and they left us alone there. Jason was 17, I was 15, and Lauren was 12, so they figured we could handle it for a few hours. Honestly, we were kind of relieved. It meant we could mess around without them hovering. The sun was beating down that morning, and the heat made everything feel heavy. I remember the smell of dry earth and pine needles, and the way the dust kicked up in little clouds whenever we moved. Buck, our German shepherd, was with us. He was always sticking close, panting in the shade or nosing around the rocks. He's a big dog, usually pretty calm, but that day, he started acting off almost as soon as our parents' truck disappeared down the dirt road. At first, it was just little things. He'd stop and stare into the trees, his ears perked up, and then he'd let out this low growl that was more vibration than sound. Jason brushed it off, saying it was probably a squirrel or something, but I could feel this knot tightening in my stomach. Buck doesn't growl for no reason. We were digging in this spot where our dad said we might find some trilobites or plant fossils. Jason was using a pickaxe to break up the harder layers, and Lauren was sifting through the loose dirt with a screen. I was just kind of watching, feeling bored and sticky with sweat. Then Buck's growling got louder, more insistent. He was focused on this gully about 50 feet away, a deep cut in the land filled with scrub brush and shadows. The way he was standing, all stiff-legged and hackles raised, made the hair on my arms stand up. I called him back, but he ignored me, which he never does. Jason finally put down his tool and walked over to see what was up. That's when we saw it. From behind this massive boulder at the edge of the gully, something stepped out. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of it. It was just a shape, too big to be a person or a bear. Then it moved into the sunlight, and I felt this cold rush go through me. It was huge, like 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that was matted and shaggy. Its muscles were bulging under the fur, and I could see them flexing as it breathed. The breathing was what got me, heavy and loud, like it was working hard just to stand there. It scanned the area, turning its head slowly, and I swear it felt like it was looking right at us. Its eyes were dark, set deep in its face, and there was this intensity to them that made my blood run cold. We were frozen, all three of us. Jason had his hand on Buck's collar, holding him back, but Buck was pulling and snarling like I'd never seen before. The creature didn't seem scared or aggressive at first. It was just there. Then it started walking toward our dig site. Each step was deliberate, heavy, like it was sinking into the ground. The sound of its feet hitting the dirt was a dull thud that I could feel in my chest. It wasn't running or charging, just moving steadily, and that made it even worse. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my ribs. Lauren was gripping my arm, her fingers digging in, and I could hear her breathing in little gasps. When it got closer, maybe 30 feet away, it stopped near this big rock that was part of the slope we were digging on. The rock had to weigh at least 100 pounds. I'd tried to move it earlier and couldn't budge it. The creature reached out with one hand, and I mean, it was a hand, not a paw, with thick fingers and nails that looked almost human, but rougher. It wrapped its fingers around the rock like it was nothing, and with this easy, fluid motion, it shoved the rock down the slope. The rock tumbled and crashed, sending dirt and smaller stones flying, and the sound echoed through the valley. It didn't even seem to strain, just did it like it was brushing off a leaf. Then it turned and walked back toward the gully, disappearing behind the boulder again. For a long time, none of us moved. Buck had stopped barking and was just whining, pressed against Jason's legs. The air felt thick, and I could still smell this musky animal scent that the creature had left behind. It was like wet dog and earth, but stronger, more pungent. My legs were shaking so bad I had to sit down on the ground. Jason finally spoke, his voice all tight and shaky. "What the hell was that?" he said, and I just shook my head because I had no words. Lauren started crying quietly, and I put my arm around her, but I was trembling too much to be any comfort. We packed up our stuff as fast as we could, not even bothering to clean the tools properly. Jason kept looking over his shoulder, and every little noise, a bird chirping, the wind rustling the trees, made us jump. We decided to wait in the trailer until our parents got back. The trailer was this old, beat-up thing we'd borrowed from a friend, parked about 100 yards from the dig site. It felt flimsy and small, like it wouldn't offer any protection. But it was better than being out in the open. The rest of the afternoon dragged on. We tried to act normal, playing cards or whatever, but every time Buck perked up, we'd all freeze. The sun started to set, painting the sky in oranges and purples, but the beauty of it was lost on me. All I could think about was that thing out there. When our parents finally got back, we didn't tell them everything right away. I mean, how do you say, "Hey, we saw a giant hairy monster shove a rock around"? They'd think we were making it up, or that we'd been in the sun too long. So we just said we were tired and wanted to turn in early. That night, I was lying in my bunk in the trailer, trying to sleep, but every creak and groan of the metal kept me awake. Lauren was in the bunk below me, and I could hear her shifting around. Jason was on the other side, and I knew he was awake too because I could see the glow of his phone screen. Buck was curled up on the floor, but he wasn't sleeping. He was tense, his ears twitching at every sound. Then, around maybe 2 in the morning, I heard it. Something heavy walking outside. At first I thought it might be an animal, like a deer or something, but deer don't sound that heavy. This was a slow, deliberate thud, 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 like whatever it was had real weight to it. Buck started growling low in his throat, and then he let out this sharp bark that made me jump. The walking stopped right next to the trailer, and I could feel the vibration through the floor. My heart was racing, and I held my breath, listening. Then came the thump. It was against the wall, right near where my head was. Not a knock, but a solid thud, like someone had slammed their fist into the metal. The whole trailer shook, and Lauren let out this little squeak of fear. Buck went crazy, barking and snarling, scratching at the door. I could hear him hitting it with his body, like he was trying to get out. Jason sat up in his bunk, and I saw his face in the dim light, pale and wide-eyed. "What is that?" he whispered, and I just shook my head again. The thumping happened once more, harder this time, and I could hear this deep, rumbling sound from outside, like a grunt or a growl, but deeper than any animal I'd ever heard. It lasted for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Then the walking started again, moving away from the trailer, and gradually the sounds faded into the distance. Buck kept barking for a while longer, but eventually he quieted down, panting and whining. None of us slept after that. We just sat there in the dark, listening to the silence, which felt even more terrifying than the noise. When the sun finally came up, we crept outside, half expecting to see something waiting for us. The air was cool and fresh, but that musky smell was still there, faint but unmistakable. That's when we saw the footprints. They were in the soft dirt around the trailer, huge and deep, like someone had pressed down with a lot of force. Each print was easily twice the size of my foot, with a shape that wasn't quite human, wider at the front, with what looked like toes. Jason got a ruler from the trailer and measured one. It was over 18 inches long. We just stared at them, not saying anything. What could we say? When our parents woke up, we showed them the footprints and told them everything. At first they looked skeptical, but when they saw how shaken we were, and Buck still acting jumpy, they started to take it seriously. My dad went out to look around, and he came back quiet and grim. He didn't say much, just started packing up the trailer. We cut our stay short and left that morning, driving out of the valley without looking back. I've thought about that day a lot over the years. The raw power of that creature, the way it moved that rock like it was nothing, the sound of its footsteps in the night. It's all stuck with me. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the thud against the wall or the way it scanned the area with those dark eyes. We never went back to Gunnison Valley, and I don't think I ever will. Whatever that thing was, it's out there, and I can't explain it, not to myself or to anyone else. All I know is that it happened, and it changed something in me, this deep-seated fear that never really goes away. Story 16. That day, I'd left work a little late, so it was already getting dark. The sun had just dipped below the trees, and the sky was that deep, orangey purple color that makes everything feel kind of peaceful. I had the windows rolled down because the air was cool, and I could smell that damp, earthy scent from the woods. I was listening to some old rock station on the radio, not really paying attention, just letting my mind wander. I was tired, you know? Long day, and I was looking forward to some of my mom's cooking. She always makes this chicken casserole that's just amazing. The road was pretty empty. It usually is out there. Maybe 1 or 2 cars passed me going the other way, but mostly it was just me and my beat-up sedan. I was doing about 50 miles an hour, which is the speed limit, and I remember feeling relaxed, almost drowsy. The trees were a solid wall of green on either side, so thick you couldn't see more than a few feet in. It's the kind of place where you half expect to see something move in the shadows, but you shrug it off because it's probably just a raccoon or something. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, this thing just burst into my headlights. I mean, 1 second the road was empty, and the next, there it was, right in front of me. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. My first thought was that it was a bear, because we have black bears around here, but this was way too big, and it moved differently. Bears kind of lumber along, but this thing, it was fast, unbelievably fast. It dashed across the road in what felt like a split second, but I saw it clear as day. It was tall, like really tall. I'd say around 10 feet, maybe even a bit more. Its body was thick and solid, like a football player's, but scaled up, and it had these long arms that swung as it moved. The hair covering it was mostly gray, but the ends were tipped with this reddish color, almost like it had been dipped in rust. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I saw. The head was conical, sort of pointed, and it didn't have much of a neck, just this powerful shoulders leading up to it. Its legs were massive, and when its feet hit the pavement, I heard this heavy thump sound, not like a deer's light steps, but something deeper, more substantial. It cleared the entire road in 2 long strides, just 2, and then it was gone into the trees on the other side. I slammed on the brake so hard that the tires screeched and the car skidded a little. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I just sat there for what felt like forever, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The headlights were still on, lighting up the empty road, and all I could see were the shadows of the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was it a bear? No, bears don't move like that, and they're not that tall. A person in a costume, that seemed even more ridiculous. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere dressed like that and moving that fast? I kept replaying the image in my head. The way it moved was so fluid, so powerful. It didn't look like it was running scared or anything. It was just crossing the road, like it had somewhere to be. And the sound, those thumps. They weren't loud, but they were distinct, like someone hitting the ground with a sledgehammer. I could still hear them echoing in my ears. My breath was coming in short gasps, and I had to consciously make myself take deep breaths to calm down. I looked around, half expecting to see it again, but there was nothing, just the quiet woods and the hum of my car's engine. After a minute or two, I put the car back in drive and slowly started moving again. I kept my speed down, maybe 30 miles an hour, and my eyes were glued to the sides of the road. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles turned white. The radio was still on, but I turned it off because the noise was distracting. I needed to focus. My mind was going a mile a minute. What was that thing? Bigfoot? I'd heard stories, of course, but I always thought they were just tall tales. Now, I wasn't so sure. The rest of the drive to my mom's felt like it took forever. Normally, it's only about 10 minutes from that spot to her house, but that night, it felt like hours. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. The woods seemed darker now, more menacing. I could see the shapes of trees looming over the road, and every time a branch moved, my heart would skip a beat. I was sweating, even though the air was cool, and I had this cold knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. When I finally pulled into my mom's driveway, I sat in the car for a few minutes, just trying to collect myself. I didn't want to go in there looking like I'd seen a ghost. I took a few deep breaths, wiped the sweat off my forehead, and forced myself to smile. My mom was waiting at the door, and she gave me a hug like she always does. She asked if I was okay, and I just said I was tired from work. I didn't mention what happened. How could I? She'd think I was losing it, plus I needed to process it myself first. I didn't want to exaggerate or make it sound like some big dramatic thing if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. We had dinner, and I tried to act normal, but I kept zoning out. I'd be eating, and then suddenly I'd see that image again. The gray hair with red tips, the conical head, the way it moved. My mom noticed I was quiet, and she asked if everything was all right. I just shrugged and said I had a lot on my mind. Inside, I was a mess. I felt jumpy, and every little noise made me tense up. At one point, her dog barked at something outside, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. My mum laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. After dinner, I helped her clean up, and then I left. Driving home, I took a different route, even though it added 20 minutes to the trip. I just couldn't bring myself to go back down that same road. Not yet. For the next few days, I thought about it constantly. I'd be at work, and my mind would wander back to that moment. I started looking up stuff online, Bigfoot sightings in South Carolina, descriptions of what people had seen. A lot of it matched what I'd experienced. The height, the build, the hair color. Some accounts mentioned red-tipped hair, which sent a shiver down my spine. I wasn't alone in this, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. A couple of days later, I decided I had to go back. I needed to see if there was any evidence, or if I could spot anything else. So I drove out there again, during the daytime this time. The road looked completely normal, just a quiet stretch of asphalt with trees on either side. I slowed down as I approached the spot where I'd seen it, and I even pulled over to the side for a minute. I got out of the car and walked a few steps into the woods, but I didn't go far. The undergrowth was thick, and it was easy to see why something could disappear so quickly. I looked for footprints or broken branches, but I didn't find anything obvious. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right place, or maybe it had all been washed away by rain. Standing there, though, I felt this overwhelming sense of unease. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birds chirping, no rustling, just silence. It was like everything was holding its breath. I got back in my car and drove away, and I haven't been back on that road since. Every time I think about it, my stomach clenches. I keep telling myself it was just a bear or a trick of the light, but I know what I saw. That image is burned into my brain, and I don't think it'll ever go away. So yeah, that's what happened. I still don't have any answers, and I probably never will. All I know is that I saw something out there that night, something big and fast and not of this world, and it's made me question everything I thought I knew. I drive a lot more carefully now, especially at night, and I always keep my eyes on the road. But part of me wonders if I'll ever see it again, and if I do, what I'll do. For now, I'm just trying to forget, but every time I close my eyes, I see it. Those long strides, that grey hair with red ends, and those thumping feet. And I know I'm not crazy, because you don't forget something like that. You just don't. Story 17. So, I live near the metro Atlanta area, not right in the city, but close enough that you can hear the hum of it if the wind is right. I've always been into the outdoors, you know. Not like a hardcore survivalist or anything, just a guy who likes to get away from the noise and the traffic. My thing is bike packing, taking my bike, loading it up with camping gear, and just hitting a trail for a night or two. It's my reset button. This time I decided to head out to a spot near the old Silver Comet Trail. My goal was a place called Camp Comet. It's not an official campground or anything, just a known clearing that people use. I'd packed some new gear I wanted to test, a lighter sleeping bag, a new compact stove, that kind of thing. I was excited. It was a Friday afternoon in late September. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold, the kind of day that makes you happy to be alive. I got to the general area where I wanted to set up camp a couple hours before sunset. I pushed my bike off the main trail into this thicker patch of forest. It was a bit of a struggle with the loaded bike, the tires sinking into the soft pine needles, branches scraping against the bags. I found a decent spot, not the clearing I was aiming for, but a flat piece of ground surrounded by a tight circle of big pine trees. It felt secluded, safe. I got to work setting up my tent. The whole time I had this feeling of being really pleased with myself. Everything was working perfectly. The tent went up easy, the stove lit on the first try. I was just sitting there on a log, boiling water for some noodles, thinking, yeah, this is the life. That's when I first noticed the guy. Through the trees, maybe 50, 60 yards away, I saw a flash of color. I stood up and peered through the branches. It was a homeless man. He had a makeshift camp, a tarp strung up between two trees, a bunch of bags piled underneath. He was just sitting there, staring into a small fire. He saw me looking and just gave a slow, kind of tired wave. I waved back a little awkwardly. It didn't really bother me. You see folks living in the woods out here sometimes. I figured he was just keeping to himself, same as me. I remember thinking it was a bit of a bummer that I wasn't as alone as I thought, but it wasn't a big deal. I went back to my noodles, and that's when the first little thing happened. I heard a soft thump in the leaves off to my left. I glanced over. Nothing. Probably a pine cone, I thought. The woods are full of noises. A minute later, another one, this time from my right. A little plink sound, like a small rock hitting a leaf. Again I looked. Nothing. The light was starting to get that long, golden quality, casting deep shadows between the trees. I shrugged it off. Squirrels, it's always squirrels, or birds dropping stuff. I finished my food and cleaned up, still feeling pretty good. But the sounds didn't stop. They were small, random, a tick against a tree trunk, a rustle in the bushes that was too deliberate to be the wind. It wasn't constant, just occasional, enough to keep pulling my attention away from my book. I started to feel that first, tiny prickle of unease. It was the randomness of it. There was no pattern. It felt like I was being bracketed, like something was on the other side of this thin wall of trees, just testing, tossing little pebbles to see what I would do. The sun dipped below the tree line, and the woods got dark fast. I got my headlamp out. The beam felt weak, stupid, just pushing back the darkness a few feet at a time. The little ticks and thumps kept up. My heart was starting to beat a little quicker. I was trying so hard to be rational. It's just the forest. It's just animals. You're being a baby. I decided to get ready for bed, thinking that once I was in the tent, I'd feel better. I'd be enclosed, safe. I was crouched down, unzipping the tent flap when it happened. A rock, not a pebble. A rock about the size of a golf ball came flying out of the darkness and smacked me right on the outside of my left ankle. The pain was instant and sharp. It wasn't a "what was that" kind of pain. It was a "holy shit, that hurt" kind of pain. I yelled out, a short, sharp curse, and stumbled back, clutching my ankle. It felt like someone had taken a hammer to the bone. My rational mind just shattered. That was no accident. That was thrown, and it was thrown hard. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I could feel it in my throat. I fumbled for my bear spray, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the safety clip off. I had a handgun too, a 9mm, in a pouch on my bike. I never thought I'd actually need it. I lurched over to the bike, my ankle throbbing, and got the gun out. Just holding it made me feel a tiny bit less like prey, but only a tiny bit. The beam of my headlamp was jerking all over the trees as I spun around, trying to see something, anything. That's when the sounds started. It didn't come from one place. It came from everywhere at once, from my left, my right, from deeper in the woods behind me. It was this chattering. That's the only word I have for it. It wasn't a monkey sound. It was lower, guttural. It sounded like, and this is gonna sound crazy, but it's the only thing that fits. It sounded like a recording of samurai warriors yelling and chattering, but played back at half speed and coming from a chest the size of a barrel. It was a deep, loose chattering full of clicks and growls. It wasn't a language, but it was communication. There was intelligence in it. They were talking to each other. The fear that hit me then was like nothing I've ever felt. It wasn't just being scared, it was a physical, primal terror that emptied my mind of every thought except one. You are not at the top of the food chain here. My whole body started to shake. I mean violent, uncontrollable shaking. My teeth were chattering. I couldn't get a full breath. I backed up against the thickest pine tree I could find, pressing my back into the rough bark, trying to make myself small. I held the bear spray in one hand and the gun in the other, pointing them out into the blackness. But it felt useless. What was I going to shoot at? The darkness? The chattering would stop for a minute, and the silence was somehow worse. It was a heavy, waiting silence. Then it would start up again from a different direction. It felt like they were moving, circling me. I could hear heavy, quiet footsteps crunching in the dry leaves, not the light steps of a deer. These were thuds, solid, heavy impacts. I could feel them through the ground. I don't know how long I stood there, shaking against that tree. It felt like hours. My muscles were screaming from tension. Every shadow in my headlamp beam looked like a hulking shape about to rush me. I knew I couldn't stay there. The tree felt like no protection at all. I made a decision. It was probably a stupid one, but it was all I had. I had to get in the tent. The tent was my shell, my stupid little nylon shell. I half crawled, half ran the few feet to it, practically fell through the door and zipped it shut behind me. I sat in the middle of the tent, knees pulled to my chest, the gun and bear spray held tight. The thin fabric of the tent was all that separated me from whatever was out there. It felt so flimsy. For a few minutes it was quiet. Just my own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in my ears. I thought maybe they'd left. Maybe I'd scared them off. Then I heard the man's dog. I'd forgotten all about him. From the direction of his camp, I heard his dog start to bark. It wasn't a normal bark. It was a frantic, high-pitched, terrified yelping, the sound a dog makes when it's absolutely losing its mind with fear. And then, cutting through the dog's barks and the night air, came a sound I will never ever forget. It was a whoop. A single, powerful vocalization that seemed to shake the very air. It was incredibly loud, deep, and it rose in pitch before cutting off abruptly. It wasn't a howl, it wasn't a scream, it was a whoop. It was a call, a declaration. It came from maybe 100 yards away, but it felt like it was right outside my tent. The power in it was staggering. It was a sound that shouldn't come from a living thing in these woods. The second it ended, the dog's barking just stopped. Not like it was pulled inside, but like it was switched off. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. It was a thick, heavy, knowing silence. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in that tent, frozen, listening to every single sound the forest made. Every rustle was a footstep. Every snap of a twig was them getting closer. I heard the chattering a few more times, softer now, more distant. They were still out there. I knew they were. I was just waiting for the moment. A hand, a huge, powerful hand, would rip through the nylon and grab me. The night was the longest of my life. I watched the digital numbers on my watch change, minute by agonizing minute. I prayed for the sun. I've never been a religious man, but I prayed that night. When the first hint of grey light finally started to filter through the trees, it was the most beautiful and relieving thing I have ever seen. I waited until I could properly see, until the world had shape and colour again. I didn't hear anything anymore, just the normal morning sounds of birds. My hands were still shaking as I unzipped the tent. I moved fast, my movements jerky and frantic. I didn't care about folding anything. I just stuffed my sleeping bag into its sack, collapsed the tent poles, and shoved the whole wet, messy bundle into my backpack. I kept the gun in my hand the entire time, my head on a swivel, scanning the tree line. I saw nothing, just trees. I loaded the bike, my fingers fumbling with the straps. My ankle was a dull, purple ache. I didn't even look in the direction of the homeless man's camp. I didn't want to know. I just got on my bike, and I started to pedal. I didn't look back. I pedaled like I was being chased. My legs burned, my lungs burned, but I didn't slow down until I was back on the paved part of the Silver Comet Trail. And then I didn't stop until I saw another person, a jogger with earbuds in, who gave me a weird look as I flew past him, wild-eyed and breathing like a racehorse. I got home, I locked my door, and I sat on my couch for the rest of the day just staring at the wall. I know what I heard, I know what I felt. There were at least two of them. They were big, they were intelligent, and they were communicating. They were letting me know I was in their space. The rock was a warning. The chatter was them talking about me. The whoop was a signal. I have no doubt in my mind. None. I'm never going back. Not to that spot. Not to any spot that deep in the woods. My bike is in the garage and it's probably going to stay there. I can't even look at my camping gear. I keep the gun on my nightstand now. Everyone talks about Bigfoot like it's a joke, a fun mystery. It's not a mystery. It's not fun. It's a feeling of being completely and utterly powerless. It's the sound of something that should not exist, telling you that you don't belong there. And I heard it, I felt it, and that's something I have to live with now. Story 18. The day it happened started like any other. I got home from my shift at the plant around 5 in the evening. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Mary had made meatloaf for dinner, and we ate at the little formica table in the kitchen, the window unit AC fighting a losing battle against the humidity. We talked about normal things, the price of groceries, a letter from her sister. Nothing that would hint at what was coming. After dinner, we watched some TV, the news mostly, and then headed to bed around 10:30. The last thing I remember was the sound of the crickets, a constant rhythmic chirping that usually lulled me to sleep. It was a normal, boring Tuesday night. I woke up first, just after 6 in the morning. The sun was already up, casting long, sharp shadows through the trees. I shuffled into the kitchen to start the coffee, my eyes still gummed shut with sleep. Mary was still in bed. It was when I was standing at the sink, waiting for the pot to brew, that I glanced out the window towards the carport, and my heart just dropped, sank right into my stomach. The Ford LTD wasn't where I'd left it. Well, it was, but it wasn't. It was sitting at a weird angle, kind of canted over. The front passenger side was slumped down like the tire was flat. But that wasn't the main thing. The main thing was that the whole car looked violated. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just walked out the back door, barefoot on the cool, damp grass, and headed towards the carport. With every step, more details came into focus, each one worse than the last. The cream-colored paint was covered in long, deep scratches, like something had taken a giant key and dragged it down the sides. They weren't random swirls either. They were parallel gouges, 4 or 5 of them together, spaced a few inches apart. They went from the roof, down the doors, all the way to the rocker panels. Then I saw the dents, huge, fist-sized impressions in the metal of the hood and the roof. It looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. The antenna was bent into a perfect L shape. The driver's side mirror was hanging by its wires, the plastic casing shattered. But the thing that made the breath catch in my throat, the thing that made my skin go cold, despite the already building heat, were the footprints. The ground under the carport was just packed dirt and a little gravel, and it was covered in footprints. They were muddy, as if whatever made them had come straight out of the swampy woods behind our property. They were everywhere, a chaotic mess pressed deep into the earth, circling the car, and they were huge. I wear a size 11 work boot, and I remember crouching down, my knees popping, and holding my foot next to one of the prints. It was easily half again as long and wider. The shape was weird too, almost human-like, with a broad ball and a distinct arch. But the toes, they were long and they dug deep into the mud, like there were claws at the end of them. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation. Kids? A bear? But the scratches were too high up on the roof for a bear, and the sheer malice of it, the way the car was just systematically torn apart. It felt personal. I must have made a sound, a gasp or a curse, because Mary came out then. I heard the back screen door slam and her footsteps on the grass. She stopped right beside me, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. Tom, what in God's name? We just stood there for a minute, side by side, staring at the wreck of our car, the only car we had. The coffee was forgotten. The normal world was gone. The air, which had smelled like pine and morning dew, now had a new smell, a musky, foul odor, like wet dog and something else, something rotten. It hung thickest right around the car. I made myself move. I walked closer, my bare feet now cold and numb. I ran my fingers over one of the scratches on the driver's door. They weren't just surface marks. I could feel the bare metal underneath, the paint curled back at the edges. I looked at the footprints again, following their path. They led from the tree line right up to the car, all around it, and then back into the woods. But there was a spot near the front bumper where the prints were a mess, like something had been standing there, shifting its weight for a long time. That's when I saw the gnawing. On the front bumper, the thick, rubbery part, there were deep gouges, not scratches, but bites. Something with immense power had clamped down on the bumper and torn chunks of rubber and plastic away. I could see the tooth marks, big, rounded indentations. And on the vinyl roof, there were more of them, like something had tried to peel the material back with its teeth. Mary was crying quietly, her hand over her mouth. What did this, Tom? What could have done this? I didn't have an answer. I felt a cold knot of fear tightening in my gut. This wasn't vandalism. This was an attack. I called the Lee County Sheriff's Office from the kitchen phone, my hands shaking so bad I misdialed twice. 2 deputies showed up about 45 minutes later. A younger guy, all crisp uniform and wide eyes, and an older, heavier-set deputy with a weary look on his face. I met them in the driveway and just pointed towards the carport. The younger one let out a low whistle. The older one just sighed, like he'd seen it all before, but his eyes stayed narrowed, taking everything in. They started their work. They took pictures, the flash popping in the shady carport. They walked around the car, careful not to step on the footprints. The older deputy, his name was Miller, I think, crouched down just like I had. "Bear, you think?" the younger one asked. Deputy Miller shook his head slowly. "Ain't no bear made these tracks, son. Look at the stride too long, and the toes, see how they're splayed." He looked up at me. "You got dogs around here? Big ones?" "No, sir," I said. "Just the Johnson's Beagle 2 properties over, and he's a little thing." He nodded, then his eyes caught on something. He pointed to the side of the car, near one of the deep scratches on the rear quarter panel. "What's that?" There, caught in the sharp, curled edge of the paint, were a few strands of hair. They were long, maybe 2 or 3 inches, and a reddish-brown color like rust or dried blood. Deputy Miller carefully used a pair of tweezers from his kit and a little evidence envelope to collect them. He held the envelope up to the light. "Looks like red fox hair," he muttered, more to himself than to us. A little flicker of hope went through me. A fox? A fox could explain the hair, maybe. But a fox doesn't leave footprints bigger than a man's. A fox doesn't bend a car antenna or dent a hood. A fox doesn't gnaw on a bumper. The younger deputy was making a plaster cast of one of the clearer footprints. He mixed the powder with water in a bucket he'd gotten from our shed and poured the white slurry into the impression. We all stood there watching it set, the silence heavy and uncomfortable. The only sound was the buzz of flies that had started to gather, drawn by that faint, rotten smell. When the deputy peeled the cast up, it was perfect, a detailed replica of that huge 5-toed, clawed foot. He turned it over, and we all stared at it. It was undeniably real, and it was undeniably wrong. It wasn't a bear track. It wasn't a dog track. It was something else. Deputy Miller looked from the plaster cast in his partner's hands to the strands of red hair in the evidence bag to our demolished car. He looked tired, and he looked spooked. "This is unusual," he said, which was the understatement of the century. "The hair looks like fox. But these tracks and the damage," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I've seen coons tear up trash cans. I've seen deer run through a garden. This is a different level of force." That was the word that stuck with me, force. The destructive force was evident in every dent, every gouge. This thing, whatever it was powerful, impossibly strong. The thought of that kind of strength, that kind of raw physical power, being out there in the woods that surrounded our home, made my blood run cold. Mary was holding onto my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. I could feel her trembling. The deputies finished up their report. They took the plaster cast and the hair sample. They told us they'd be in touch, that they'd send the evidence to the state lab. But their tone said it all. They were puzzled. They had no answers. They were just as lost as we were. After they left, the silence felt louder than before. The car sat there, a ruined monument to something we couldn't understand. The sun was high in the sky now, beating down, making the scratched metal gleam. We tried to clean up a little, but it was pointless. Every scratch I wiped down, every piece of broken plastic I picked up, just drove the reality of it deeper into my brain. The rest of the day was a blur of fear and frustration. We called our insurance company. The agent was skeptical, talking about acts of God and vandalism exclusions. How do you explain to a man on the phone that your car was mauled by an unknown creature? You can't. You just sound crazy. As evening began to fall, the shadows from the trees stretched long fingers across the yard, reaching for the house. The normal night sounds started up. The crickets, the frogs from the nearby creek, but they didn't sound comforting anymore. They sounded like a cover for something else. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves made us both jump. We locked all the doors, something we rarely did out there in the country. We closed all the curtains. We sat in the living room with the lights on, not talking, just listening. The image of those footprints, the feel of those deep scratches under my fingertips, the sight of the gnawed bumper. It all played on a loop in my head. The terror wasn't in a loud noise or a sudden appearance. The real terror, the moment it truly sank in, was the slow, dawning realization that something non-human had been here, something that walked on two legs, something with immense strength and claws and teeth, had come out of the woods we looked at every day. It had circled our car, studied it, and then systematically torn it apart for reasons we could never comprehend. It wasn't a random animal. The pattern, the focus, the sheer intensity of the damage, it felt intelligent, and it had been right outside our bedroom window while we slept. We never got a straight answer from the authorities. A few weeks later, Deputy Miller called. The state lab said the hair was, indeed, from a red fox, but they had no explanation for the plaster casts of the tracks. They didn't match any known wildlife in South Carolina. The case was left open, unresolved. We got the car fixed eventually. The insurance paid for most of it after a long fight, but we never parked it under that carport again. We started parking it right up by the front door, under the porch light. We moved away from that house the next year. We never talked about it much, Mary and I. It was one of those things that was too big, too strange to put into words. But I still think about it, especially on hot, still July nights. I think about the smell, and the mud, and the perfect, terrifying clarity of that plaster cast. I think about the silence of the deputies, a silence that spoke louder than any theory. They were the experts, and they were stumped. That's what stays with me. Not knowing. The fear of the unknown creature that for one night decided to leave its mark on our lives, and then vanished back into the dark woods, leaving us with nothing but questions and a deep, cold fear of what else might be out there in the dark. Story 19. Okay, I'll try to get this right. I'm still kind of shaky even thinking about it, let alone writing it all down, but I need to get it out, and this seems like the place where people might actually believe me, or at least not laugh in my face. So, this happened last Wednesday night. Not last week, but the one before that. I remember because Wednesday is the one weeknight we have evening service at church, and it always runs a bit late. My friend, I won't use his name, he doesn't want to be involved in talking about this, was giving me a ride home. We'd just left the church parking lot around 9:15, maybe 9:20. I remember checking the clock on the dash when we pulled out because my mom was expecting me back by 9:45, and I was thinking we had plenty of time. It's about a 25-minute drive to my house from there, mostly down this long, dark stretch of Highway 101 that cuts through Paulding County. The 101 at night it's just dark. Not like a little dark, but a deep, swallowing kind of dark once you get past the last gas station at the edge of town. Your headlights just make these two tunnels of light, and everything else is just blackness. Woods on both sides, mostly. Some swampy areas. You know the kind of road everyone around here does. You don't stop on it at night. You just don't. We were just driving, not talking much. The radio was on low, some quiet country station, and the heater was blowing because there was a real chill in the air for this time of year. I had my seat leaned back a little, just staring out the windshield, watching the yellow line zip by. My friend was driving, both hands on the wheel, just like his dad taught him. It was normal. It was so completely, boringly normal. It was right after we passed the old Miller Creek Bridge. I'd say it was about 9:30. I saw movement on the right-hand side of the road, just at the very edge of the headlights. My first thought, my absolute first thought, was deer. You see them all the time out here. They freeze in the lights, and you have to slow down or you'll hit them. Heads up, I said, kind of quietly, and pointed. My friend saw it too, and he let off the gas a little. We both expected it to bolt across the road. That's what they do. But this didn't bolt. It was still in the shadows, just outside the main beam of the headlights. But as we got closer, it stepped forward, right to the edge of the gravel shoulder, and it stopped. It just stopped there. And that's when I knew it wasn't a deer. The shape was all wrong. It was upright, not standing straight up like a man, but hunched over, with these huge, rounded shoulders that looked like mounds of muscle. Its arms were long, freakishly long, hanging down past its knees. They swung a little as it moved, just a gentle, heavy sway. My brain was scrambling, trying to find a box to put this thing in. A bear. Was it a bear walking on its hind legs? But it didn't move like a bear. Bears on two legs are clumsy, wobbly. This thing moved with a kind of purpose, a steady, fluid pace that was, I don't know, it was efficient. It was like it was built for this, for moving through that dense, dark landscape. We were close enough now that the light from the headlights was starting to catch it. It was covered in hair or fur, but it wasn't like a bear's fur. It was dark, a matted, blackish brown, and where the light hit it, it didn't shine. It just seemed to absorb the light, making it look even more solid, more dense. It was massive. I'm not a small guy, and this thing made me feel like a child. Its back was easily as wide as a refrigerator, and it must have been 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Even with that hunch, it didn't look at us. That was maybe the worst part. We were in a car, a big metal thing with bright lights, making noise, moving right towards it. A deer would have stared, a person would have turned. This thing just ignored us completely. It was like we were a gust of wind or a falling leaf. Totally insignificant. It took a step off the shoulder and onto the asphalt. Its gait was so smooth, one foot in front of the other, those long arms swinging in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. It didn't hurry. It didn't amble. It just crossed. It took it maybe 3 or 4 of those strides to get from one side of the 2-lane highway to the other. Each step was deliberate, powerful. I could almost feel the weight of it through the car. The inside of the car had gone dead silent. The radio was still on, but I couldn't hear it anymore. All I could hear was the hum of the engine and the sound of my own heart beating in my ears. My friend had completely stopped the car. We weren't rolling anymore. We were just stopped in the middle of our lane, which is a stupid, dangerous thing to do on that road. But neither of us was thinking about that. We were just watching. The creature reached the other side of the road, where the woods come right up to the ditch. The ditch there is swampy, filled with black water and cattails. It didn't even break stride. It stepped down into the ditch, and for a second, I lost it in the darkness. Then I saw the reeds and the tall grass part. Not like something was pushing through them, but like they were just making way for it. There was no splash, no crackle of branches. It moved with this unnatural grace, like it was part of the shadows themselves. And then it was gone, just like that. The swamp grass settled back into place, and the darkness was complete again. We sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, but it was probably only 20 or 30 seconds, just stopped in the middle of the highway. My hands were gripping the sides of my seat, my knuckles white. I could feel a cold sweat all over my body, under my church clothes. My mouth was dry as dust. My friend finally took his foot off the brake and we started rolling forward again, slowly. He didn't speed up. We just crept along at maybe 10 miles an hour, both of us staring at the spot where it had disappeared. The woods there are thick and tangled, a wall of pine and oak and God knows what else. It's the kind of place you couldn't pay me to go into during the day, let alone at night. "What was that?" my friend whispered. His voice was tight, strained. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head. My mind was replaying the image over and over. The hunched shoulders, the swing of those long arms, the way it moved. So powerful, so utterly sure of itself. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't animal. It wasn't human. It was something else. We drove the rest of the way to my house in total silence. The normal sounds of the car, the tires on the pavement, the engine, the blower for the heater, they all sounded different now. They sounded small. I kept my eyes glued to the tree line, scanning the darkness, half expecting to see it keeping pace with us, those long arms swinging. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every clump of bushes looked like a hunched form. I thought about all the stories you hear growing up around here. The Pauling County stories. Old-timers talking about things they saw in the woods, things that didn't fit. Sounds that weren't from any animal they knew. You dismiss it as drunk talk or ghost stories to scare kids. You laugh it off. But sitting in that car, with the feeling of that thing's presence still hanging in the air, none of those stories felt like stories anymore. They felt like warnings. We got to my house, and my friend pulled into the driveway. He left the engine running. He didn't look at me, he just stared straight ahead, his hands still clenched on the wheel. "You saw it too, right?" I asked him, my voice barely more than a croak. He just nodded. A quick, sharp movement. "Yeah," he said, "I saw it." I got out of the car and he backed out of the driveway before I'd even reached my front door. He didn't wait to see me go inside, he just left. I stood on my porch for a minute, listening to the sound of his car fade away down the road. The night was quiet. Crickets, a faint breeze in the trees. A normal night, but it didn't feel normal. It felt like the world had just tilted on its axis, and only the two of us had noticed. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it crossing the road, that steady, unstoppable pace, the way it didn't acknowledge us. That was the part that stuck with me, that still sticks with me. We were nothing to it. Less than nothing. We were just a momentary flicker in its world. The next day, I called my friend. He didn't want to talk about it. He said, "Let's just forget it, man. It was probably just a bear." But his voice was shaky, and we both knew it wasn't a bear. "You don't forget what a bear looks like. This was different. This was something that shouldn't be." I drove past that spot on the 101 a few days later, in the bright light of a Saturday afternoon. I pulled over on the shoulder and got out. The ditch on the other side was just a ditch. Muddy water, some beer cans, cattails. The woods were just woods. There were no giant footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anything out of the ordinary had ever been there. It was just a quiet, swampy patch of forest, but I knew. I stood there on the asphalt, the sun warm on my back, and I looked into those trees, and I felt a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach, because I knew what was in there, or what could be in there. Something old and powerful and completely unknown. Something that walks on two legs and doesn't care about our cars, or our roads, or our world. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up some nights, is the feeling that it's still out there, right now, moving through those swampy woods with that same steady, graceful pace. And it's not hiding, it's just living. And we're the ones who are trespassing.